Right, this is going to be another episode of the Four Horsemen. By the way, in case you dip in and out, or maybe all the league ones weren't interesting to you, we don't do the announcement thing anymore because basically we realised one, we're going to do the show anyway. It's not like if it reached 200, we're like, right, cancel it, lads, all go home. And then
True.
also, even though I didn't have a big deal with it, it just opened us up to this stupid angle where if it was a serious topic, they're like, you're farming retweets. As though, by the way, real TV shows don't like advertise the shows coming up and, have sponsors of that. But okay, we're here. It's the Four Horsemen. This one we have as our guest, messioso. What actually is your title? Is it General Manager in Complexity?
Oh, he's
You
muted.
muted. You muted.
General manager of Counter-Strike specifically.
There you go. Right. So obviously
Absolute-
he's also
absolute
someone
fact.
who has a long time history in Counter-Strike. He used to work for some of the tournament organizers. He's been an admin. So he's also someone who, as well as actually being within the space, knows actually how the rules work. And the joke is, as we discussed beforehand, everyone just asks him anyway, as though he is like the top ESL guy or works for Valve, which neither of which are the case. So in this episode, we will actually have sort of a gamut of topics about CS. Obviously, we'll hit on some big things like the Valve ruling, the RMR things, the ranking things. Maybe we'll talk about some other issues as well within the space, certain teams that might have a conflict with tournament organizers that then themselves might in the future host majors, etc. All the usual classics. Conflict of interest will be thrown around that term that, again, you don't really understand. It's sort of like austerity measures in the UK. You've heard it many times. You probably said it yourself over coffee. You don't really know what it means, though, do you? But it makes you sound like you read The Guardian. It's okay, Monty, take it away.
There we go.
As an American, I understood very little of that, so I'll just assume that it was not edgy. Anyway, let's get into it, because for you guys, basically a while ago, in fact, in August of 2023, so a year ago, there was a sudden announcement from Valve, which was called a level playing field. And what this basically means is that Valve at this time decided that they were going to restructure the way that professional Counter-Strike was being played. As they see it, they have three major points they wanted to address. One, tournament organizers will no longer have unique business relationships or other conflicts of interest with teams that participate in their events. What this means is, now, Flashpoint didn't live long enough to get here, but it would have been affected by this, obviously. I was commissioner of that. Thorin worked on that as well. What this does affect currently is tournaments like EPL and Blast, who have partner organizations, and those partner teams have unique business relationships with ESL/Faceit and then Blast, respectively. That means that they get stipends for being parts of these leagues or guaranteed revenue minimums. And so what ended up happening is we had teams like EG kind of abusing this system, fielding like very bad rosters, which would make, they had a preferential relationship because they were basically automatically qualified to these events, and they didn't have to prove performance in order to get there, which meant that they were kind of sucking life, one might say, out of some potentially top tier events and drawing a kind of unreasonable amount of money. The second point that they wanted to address was invitations to all tournaments will use our ranking system, which is called the Valve Regional Standings, and they have for every region, so Europe, Americas, and Asia, they have independent rankings, and then they have an aggregated global ranking, or otherwise be determined by open qualifiers, and we'll get to the specifics about this. And then the third one is any compensation for participating teams, prize pool, or otherwise will be made public and will be driven by objective criteria that can be inspected by the community. So these were kind of the points that they wanted to bring up. And we didn't exactly know until about a month ago or a few weeks ago how this is going to be implemented when Valve dropped another post that was the tournament operations requirements. And so this is very confusing, as you might understand. So we are going to break that down for you. But first of all, it said that there was, they're trying to also bring in some elements of, lack of conflict, like eliminating conflict of interests and competitive integrity. And I figured that's a good spot to dive in because obviously it's spicy, and because I think we can get through this one pretty quickly before getting really technical on some of the tier 1 versus tier 2. What does this actually mean? How does this affect teams like Complexity, for example, who are qualifying to these events. So what they have said, and this is very funny about conflicts of interests, is that basically the licensee and tournament event staff may not have any business relationship, including but not limited to shared management, shared ownership of entities, licensing and loans, whether related to Valve games or otherwise, with any participating team or athletes unless approved by Valve, very crucially. An entanglement is considered approved if, one of two ways, it is disclosed to Valve in writing and Valve has not objected within 90 days of the disclosure, provided that only disclosures after the effective date of the agreement shall trigger the 90-day period. And then when it's within its sole discretion, Valve reserves the rights to require the licensee address and remove the entanglement within a reasonable period of time, not to exceed 2 weeks, which is very short, by the way, to divest yourself of an asset like that, or terminate the agreement without cost or penalty for Valve. So basically what this means, guys, is that if you operate a tournament, you can't have ownership over teams or players or any financial entanglements with the athletes, the players, basically the pros. And you have to disclose this, and Valve can say absolutely nothing. And if they just don't respond to your submission within 90 days, it's considered not a conflict of interest, which is very weird that they just sit. Well, I mean, it's not weird for Valve, if you know Valve. They love to sit there and say absolutely nothing. That's kind of their shtick. But why we're bringing this up first is because there have been questions about Falcons ownership and whether it is the Saudi government or the Sovereign Wealth Fund or certain key members like members of the royal family or other rich entities which are then entangled with the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And how does this affect Falcons playing at ESL events, at the Esports World Cup? But the other thing I want to talk about is, would they just approve this anyway? Because without ESL and the Esports World Cup, is there a Counter-Strike circuit? So do you think they just tacitly approve this and then just don't disclose that these entanglements exist? Who wants to talk about it?
We should start with Graham, because if I remember rightly, he nearly joined Falcons as their general manager.
It's shorting you out, but it's all good.
No, that definitely never happened.
Definitely jump in whenever you want this episode. On the past one, you always wait until we asked you. Don't worry, just jump in if you've got something, by the way. Don't worry about that.
No, I can at least say I've never spoken to Falcons in that capacity ever.
Damn, you must be the only person who hasn't.
You've thrown me under the bus there, but no,
even we did.
It was just Elise sending his laundry out. He works for Cole, mate. What do you want?
It's interesting actually that they have a different conflict of interest rule for the players and teams compared to the tournament.
I actually was going to ask about that later, but we can do the player one later. Let's do the team side first.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I don't know much about the Falcons situation. Haven't looked into the ownership. I think that's probably
nobody does. Nobody knows.
Yeah, nobody does, right? But I'm sure you guys have looked into it more.
It's a naive, simple question. If they secretly have ownership with the Saudi Wealth Fund or the Saudis in any context, they would have to somehow declare it at least to Valve now, right?
That would be my understanding, yes. And whether Valve would object to that, again, if you remove ESL from the Counter-Strike ecosystem, there isn't much of an ecosystem left.
No, exactly.
I'm sure there are others who would be willing to fill it, but my guess would be that it would just be Falcons who just wouldn't have a Counter-Strike team anymore, and that would be the end of that. Logically.
Which, by the way, why would that be a problem? They would have every other game. They would have every other game, and they would have it, and they would still win hands down every Esports World Cup. Social media fucking payoff. Right, because they would still have this insane reach, and I'm sure if they weren't likely to win it, then I'm sure their friends would help manipulate it so they did. So it wouldn't be a problem for them. It would just be this one game, or maybe Dota as well, which would be a problem because obviously Falcons are very good in Dota right now. It would just be this one game. They wouldn't be allowed to go to the majors in. But Valve do this a lot of the time. They make these rules. They have a sense it's going to open a Pandora's box. But when the Pandora's box is about to be opened, they go, oh, yeah, actually, that's too fucking crazy. We don't want it to be that crazy. We don't want it to be final episode of Dungeons and Dragons crazy. So we're going to fucking just walk away from that. And what we'll
Who's
do is
watching
we'll
Dungeons
just...
and Dragons? Why are you dropping that? Who's watching? It's not Nerd Legion. You. Why are you watching bad shows? I don't even watch episode 1. Why are you watching that?
Don't you ever insult Dungeons and Dragons, sir? Anyway, it's the last episode, Dungeons and Dragons, and the Pandora's box is all flying out. Venger turns out to be Dungeon Master's son, and Valve are going, we don't care about any of this, and they walk away. And we just all have to deal with it. That's what
makes me sick. For Zoomers to understand what Pandora's box is, you have to reference Dungeons and Dragons, the TV show, antiquity and the great mythology that comes from. Like,
no, actually, it would probably be better if I did just reference mythology. Okay. Remember, it was only like 22 episodes or something. But whatever. The point being that Valve let these things occur. And then they get to the point where you think it's going to be explosive and change, and then they never commit to that. They never follow through on it. And they've done this historically time and time again.
One of the reasons why, mate, I think they do the same thing Riot does. They just don't think through all the permutations of what can happen. They don't think out the loopholes. People like you tell the whole community, like, this thing's going to happen here, and you know that this means this. And then I think it gets back to them, a la Riot, and then they go, of course, we never fully meant to implement this. Here's the new fix, which is coincidentally not what we originally did. And then they just, last second, they pull it out the fire, don't they? Like this thing with the 8 weeks thing. Like, I don't think they even thought through what Russian visas are, mate. I think someone came to them like, bro, literally like 10 of the top players are fucking Russian. They're like, take it back. We walk it back. I feel like we're doing a free focus group for them.
Yeah, no, but I think that is that's how Valve do it. Like with Riot, it's a little bit different. I think how Valve do it is they have a sense within themselves about what is the good idea, and then very often, unless it's absolutely diabolically bad, so like obviously bad on its face, they don't walk things back. They've done it with this 8 weeks thing, which we'll get to. But I think in general, I think they're comfortable kind of like, let's just see what happens and then let's make a determination about where to go from that point. And they let the chaos occur and they let everybody argue and they let the initial vapors of Pandora's box get out there. And whether or not all the evils are going to be unleashed on the world, we don't know. But they're willing to allow that at any given moment. I mean, when you deal with Valve, understand that. But they might not. They're just going to wait and see. And it's like really weird because anyone who interfaces with their esports structure, you never know which way it's going to go until it's like almost certainly had a negative impact on you. And so this is kind of where we're at right now with these like new rules. I think a lot of them are good. I felt, off the top, I was like, okay, we are so back, but there was a number of decisions within there which I'm like, these must have been written by somebody that has no understanding of how esports operates whatsoever. And then when they added the 8 weeks one on top of that, I was like, oh yeah, okay. This is like classic Valve. This is like what they did. Hey, let's just unleash skins into the ecosystem. Let's see what happens. Here's the R8. Have fun. Here's dynamic weapon pricing. Oh, okay. We've just broken esports. Not a problem. We'll walk it back. Probably. It's like they just do this shit all the time historically. I don't think they're even malicious. I just think they've never really cared enough about esports to kind of metabolize it into their decision-making process, right? I
have a question for you, which is, even though, and this is one of the other things that does annoy me, because this is actually how politics works, if people don't know. What you do is when you do a rule, I always say this, because the cynical view on politics is, actually regulations are there to protect the biggest companies and destroy any smaller company from competing with them. That's why typically they tend to even have people who used to work for their companies go on the federal board that writes the regulation that magically just protects the big company and makes it hard to defeat them. So one of the things I would ask is this: every time you make something, hey, I'm doing this really big thing, immediately I'm like, right, where's the obvious loophole? So the obvious loophole is the thing that like the moron who's at the low level won't think through. They'll just be like, oh, my team is owned by this company that also owns another team. Guess I only have a choice of divest or Can you change the rule? Well, the obvious thing I immediately think of is, remember, everything the Saudis have done, the playbook was already written by a man called Nicola Nihom. messioso knows him, don't worry about that. And basically, you thought you worked with the devil. Mate. Oh, my bad, you weren't with Sauron, but you were with Saruman. Well, fuck me, the distinction is good at least. So, okay, right, Richard, I want to ask this. One of the things famously Nicola Nihom did was, if you were someone who just checked who does own Heroic or who does own this company, you'd never find Nicola Nihom. His name wasn't the fucking name on that Verk DK or whatever website that had all the listings. But I tell you what, if you had a little clicking finger on your mouse button and you could click through a few shell companies, you'd eventually find your way to a holding company, APS Holdings or whatever, and then eventually you'd find your way to the climb or whatever his thing was called. So my question obviously would be on a Saudi angle. If they really want in, is there not a way where, this is the question of how much due diligence is Valve going to do? Can't they just do like 4 or 5 layers deep? Eventually the joke is, if I was evil, couldn't they just eventually have me be the owner, but secretly, I have a thing where I don't own it and it's theirs? And how would that work, do you think?
There's a number of places in the world where there's no amount of clicks you can do to get to the answer.
See what I mean? Who could have known?
Also, Thorin, you have to want
California is one of them, funnily enough.
You have to want to get to the answer as well. That's the thing.
That's true. Yes, you've got a very good point there.
If they submitted something and were like, oh, this company in Saudi Arabia owns it, but you don't want to actually investigate whether that company is owned by the Sovereign Wealth Fund, well, then you have the answer that satisfies you right there.
There's an obvious joke there, which is that's because, you think of the genius here, we're worried about conflict of interest in case the Saudis give preferential treatment to their team in their tournament. What if Valve thought the whole scene was sitting on the back of ESL who pays for everything, and then they might have a preferential reason to not want to know who is owning ESL? The joke is they have their own conflict of interest here.
Let's be clear. All Valve have to do at this juncture, as it relates to Falcons, is the MS Dossery, the totally real CEO and the guy who really definitely 100% runs Falcons and makes all decisions about Falcons, despite being a FIFA player, but he definitely does.
I know.
Right? No. Listen, if you doubt that, mate, I don't know what level of conspiracy theory you're on. I'd have to worry about you. I mean, they just totally gave this FIFA player all this millions to run their national org. I mean, that makes total sense. Well, anyway, MS Dossery has said in an interview on HLTV, an entity that certainly has no interest either in covering for ESL or anyone else, because they sell tickets at their events for their live podcast, and the voice of their podcast and best thing about their podcast happens to be the guy that works for ESL and does all their... Forget about all of these interwoven, this web. Okay. Forget about all of that. Again, you're on a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
The reality...
MS Dossery, I'll tell you what, I'll bet he knows how to obey a command line.
No, that's not bad. That's not bad at all.
Yeah, it's a bit too old.
No, very good. Kids don't know what DOS is now, of course.
Look up at IBM Windows.
We'll take that. Anyway, MS Dossery said in the interview on HLTV, right, which was one of, to the credit of the journalists, Striker and Prof, they did ask some pretty tough questions, but in that he said, no one from the PIF owns any percentage of Falcons. And then 20 minutes later said, well, no more than 5% on an individual basis.
Lord. Okay.
So in other words, some people from the PIF own, at the very least, 5%. Now that is enough.
They could each own 5%.
What is the issue with actually disclosing ownership publicly in that case, right? Why not just tell us who fucking owns it?
Because I'll spin that on you then. I'll actually play defense for him. Why should I do that?
So that people stop asking questions and you stop getting this PR.
Monty, I don't mind people asking questions, but I don't have to tell you. So on that one, I actually don't blame him. You don't have to disclose your investors. If someone invested in us, we don't have to disclose who it is.
This is how Duncan has lived a lot of his life, actually. You can ask the questions, mate. I ain't going to answer your fucking questions.
Exactly.
In many ways, mate, he's conflicted. He hates being against the Saudis because of the human rights thing. But because of the way they handle their shit, he fucking loves it.
As a minor joke, I'll even say low key. I even told you this. I actually am sad that they have such obviously moral and ethical violations that I can't work with them. Because when PGL pissed me off, I just wanted to do my old classic move in the CS scene, which is I go away and then all of a sudden, you know, you're watching fucking whatever it is now. I don't even know what the wrestling is. I will just go WWE again. And it's that Thorin's music, and then I just come out to the sound. Like, me and MBS come out. This is the new future of Counter Strike. Fuck PGL. We're both doing that. All the fucking way down to the ring.
The SWO, the Saudi World Orders hit.
Exactly. Obviously, I'd be the game in that scenario. No, the other thing is, like, that's the other thing, though. I've learned with people like Riot Games, the way they use their language is very precise, but they make it sound vague. So when someone says, no more than 5%, well, I need to go, wait a minute, is that 5% collectively? Is that per person? Because the joke there is you just have 10 people who own 5%, you have 50% of the company. Like, you know what I mean? I'd have to, again, they're playing silly beggars with language, and who knows what that means.
So I'll bring our guest in. He's here. Like, I want your thoughts just about overall kind of, can Valve realistically unstitch the nightmare conflict of interest that is Saudi? I mean, I obviously kind of respect the fact you are with Complexity right now. Complexity obviously are a business partner of ESL, but thus far aren't one of the orgs that are taking money from the Esports
Not
World
a partnered
Cup.
team with the Esports World Cup.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, it's tough for everyone to kind of talk about this stuff. But I mean, Valve, if I was looking at this and I'm Valve and I'm like, there's 30 teams, bare minimum, taking money from the same pot, how can independence be guaranteed at that point?
Yeah, the EWC thing is kind of a weird outlier because it's not a strictly specific Counter-Strike business entanglement, but it is a business entanglement. Yeah. So you would have to question whether that can coexist next year with Counter-Strike organizations. And there was a lot in there. So there's definitely a few issues there that don't fit within Valve's current rules or regulations, which would be the first thing to look at. Whether on the Falcons thing specifically, I mean, as we sort of covered, like, I don't think there's any way you could dig deep enough to ever find out who the real owners are. And I mean, but that's like, that could be the same for any number of esports organizations. Like, I remember back when I was working with ESL, I'd pay prize money, and some organizations would send me a different bank account every time we paid them prize money. It'd be the Cayman Islands, it'd be Cyprus, it'd be Curacao. It would literally just be like all over the fucking place.
But enough about Virtus Pro.
I love esports.
No, it wasn't even Virtus Pro. But like, and these are all orgs that, you know, like, things like, I have no doubt that these places, you know, and one of the most egregious ones was actually Gambit, I think, from memory, where Gambit had an office in Edinburgh.
Yes.
Wink, wink.
Yeah,
totally
UK org, I've always said.
Totally had an office in Edinburgh.
They were a UK org, and they were definitely sponsored by Pringles. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
That's how fast Scotland's fallen. You've become a fucking, like, shell company place now, you idiots. How's that all Scotland's got? Like, oh, I've got a fake.
At least be a shell company and a tax haven, not fucking Edinburgh.
Well, but then that did go somewhere else as well. After that, there was a link somewhere else. So, like, yeah, I mean, to say, like, Falcons were the only ones that you can't find who the real ownership is egregious, because I don't think that's the case. But Falcons would be an obvious one where you could make a link, but I don't think you'd ever be able to connect the dots fully. So who's gonna put up enough of a fight to make this worthwhile investigating? And the honest answer is, I don't think Valve are going to do it. I don't think anyone else is going to do it.
No, and the only way you would ever have this come out, because obviously Valve doesn't want to know. As long as they have plausible deniability, they're happy about this, right? And especially, like, they obviously would not want to uncover any links that might endanger Falcons' participation and ESL's participation, the Esports World Cup's participation, because that, you know, those two entities, Esports World Cup and ESL, if you even count them as separate entities, cover what, 70%, 60% of Counter-Strike's calendar, depending on whether they get a major or not, right? So it would be pretty dire. Yeah, I'm sure if they died, some other, you know, tournament organizers would be happy to pick up the slack, but would it be at the same quality? Would they have access to the same, all of the footage, all of the history that ESL has, right, to make quality events? The answer is no. Like, ESL can objectively do this the best out of anybody. So it would be kind of shooting their own esport in the foot. So I don't understand why they would want to know this, nor do, like, straight up, nor do I think they have the willpower or the manpower to investigate something like this. So the only way anything would ever change is if somebody got some sort of smoking gun document on the outside and they were forced to address it, which also is not going to happen.
There's a historical precedent, though, that if that were true, would show that Valve has changed, though, which is, if anything, one of the weird things about Valve is they've gone out of their way to do things that fuck with people, even when there was no necessarily material benefit. In fact, their whole thing, the whole time has been, we sort of act like team orgs aren't real, and these players would play in the tournament for anyone. So basically, the players are the ones who have all the power and the spots and all the, and then you're just like sort of an entity between, and you have to make do. So I actually think many times over, Valve has come out and done things that are like, would be equivalent, because remember, we're acting like what really happens, which I think is the implausible one, is that Falcons go, what, we can't be in? Pull the whole ESL. It'd be the other way around, like Richard said. If anything, wouldn't it be just get rid of the Falcons CS team or sell that to another person with another 7 shell companies or something? Like, actually, I feel like it's not only reasonable, that would actually be more in line with what Valve's done in the past, to just say, hey, you just can't have this CS team in our tournament, so sell it and you can do all the rest. And surely if you're the Saudis, look, CS definitely isn't like the biggest fish on the hook, and actually neither is esports for some of the idiots who only live in esports. Like, there's billions of dollars going into other sports, but I feel like for the sake of being in the scene and having the control and having all this like access and doing majors, I feel like the Saudis probably would say Falcons can go, or they magically get sold to ownership. The joke is, I'll say in Armenia, just to reference an old joke for ESL out there, fuck y'all. So yeah, I think that's the more likely outcome. So I actually think Valve, if they do say we don't want to find out, well, where were you fucking the last 10 years? Where were you in all those other times that we wanted you to lay down the law and magically you had to get involved?
That'll be the big difference, because, you know, the Valve I know, and I think a lot of people have always assumed that, like, when I used to do those stories, like back in the day, like, I would send them to Valve and Valve would be like, oh yeah, cheers for that, Rich. We're going to get right on it. Like, not even with iBuyPower, which is the one everyone talks about, was it like that. They left me dangling for 6 months. Like, they had all the shit they needed. I literally was in bed and got woke up saying, have you seen this? You did it. They're banned. And I'd be like, what? Valve didn't tip me off and say, like, you know. So every time, like when I exposed all of the Blast guys and they were doing the media rights scam, right? Where it was like, we own Heroic, we own, you know, fucking, what was it, Godsent, we own Norse or whatever the fucking other one that no one can remember one is.
Heroic?
And like, it was Heroic. It was Heroic, Godsent,
Norse Australis.
Norse Australis, yeah. They were like, listen, we own the image rights for all of these teams. And then it was like, I got a contract because they're publicly available in Denmark. And you look and you go, wait, that isn't what it says. You own all of these other things. And, you know, I did send that to Valve, but Valve said nothing. And my inference is from the reaction, the subsequent reaction, when they started to divest themselves and everyone was super mad at me, that made me believe that, yeah, Valve were going to enforce it. Nobody was going to get their own little monopoly, which is what everybody wants in esports. I mean, the entire history of CS for the last 15 years is a bunch of scumbags trying to have a monopoly. That's all it is. It's all it's ever been. All the exclusivity league, whatever fucking word you want to, all these franchise leagues that we ended up with, it's all the same thing. Let's have a monopoly. Let's have a monopoly, because the only way it can work is to have a monopoly. That's the belief. And so Valve did come in. They came in 2016, 2017, 2018. They used to come in and break up these monopolies. Very occasionally, I'd get an email from one of them, and they'd go, thanks for the reporting. We love your work. You know, but it wasn't like we were working in cahoots or anything. My genuine belief is that we would always hit a point where Valve just didn't have their eyes on it anymore and bad shit would happen. And if you were to ask me, that pretty much describes the last 3-4 years. That's what happened. These, you know, they're not franchise leagues, they're not exclusivity leagues, these partner leagues. That was the softening of the language that they slipped through. And they all had an entanglement. They all had an entanglement. Blast had an entanglement with all of those teams. Like, I'm paying you $3 million to be in your league. Of course we got an entanglement. ESL's was even worse. And it gets even crazier to the point where it's like they're having business with individual players. Like Player Like Simple, which mysteriously goes under. No one's even explained to me, by the way, what was the nature of Facet's partnership with the Player Like Simple project? Were they paying Simple? Was Simple paying them? It ended in 2 months. ESL Faceit Group put a fucking press release out to promote
Could have
this.
been anything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right. Exactly. They put the press release out promoting it to their fucking audience. Their audience signs up to it. They got nothing for it. And then 2 months later, we're working through refunds. No one said anything. I mean, that's the part I'm sick of. Like, if I'm Valve and I'm watching all of this, here's all Valve has to do to fix Counter-Strike tomorrow. You just turn around and you say, we consider the ESL Faceit Group in the Esports World Cup. We consider every team taking money from that pool to be involved in one big entanglement, and you don't get to play CS. You don't get to play in the majors. You don't get your sticker money. You don't get to, we're not going to give them a license. They'll never get a major again. That's all they have to do. But they won't. And I don't understand why they won't. Because Riot would. Well, old school Riot definitely would. New school Riot, by the way, that want Saudi Arabia to run their game for free, that's a different ballpark. But if we rewind 5 years, like Riot would have done that. So why can't Valve? We can end all this nonsense tomorrow, by the way. Like, Saudi can still take over games development, everything. It just doesn't get to touch CS. We can make that happen. Valve can make that happen. Valve, by the way, is the same company that was willing to pretend for tournament operators that they had the intellectual property for Valve demo files just so they could fucking copyright strike people streaming through the game client. That's what Valve were willing to pretend is true. By the way, anyone ever wants to contest that in law, you win, hands down. There is no legal argument. A tournament operator owns a demo file. They didn't make a single stitch of it. It belongs to Valve. It doesn't belong to ESL, PGL, StarLadder, anyone else. It doesn't belong to
HLTV.
NETO. It doesn't belong to HLTV.
The thing is, though, in that particular
Valve
case,
were willing to tell that lie.
In that particular
Why?
case, though, Valve can still shut you down for any reason whatsoever because the ability to stream using that IP is Valve. So they could shut you down.
So
still.
let them do it. Let them do it. Let's open the Pandora's box, right? Like, let's open a real Pandora's box. Anyone who has ever used a demo file to make content about this video game is now subject to action or not subject to action based on the precedent Valve wants to set. Let's do that. Let's definitely do that. Let's do that sooner rather than later.
Even though we ourselves said the same lines 10 minutes ago, I'll even say I do also get another sickening vibe that we're talking about ESL like they're too big to fail. And we have to have ESL and CS. Well, here's the problem. We don't. They've already said for next year, you take the ESL events off the calendar next year, Monty, you've got an entirely full calendar with more events than this year. You've got all the PGL events, you've got all the Blast events, StarLadder will come back eventually, you've got
This is definitely the time to set the precedent,
you actually could do it. Richard's not even wrong. In theory, if anything, actually at the moment, they've even sort of cut ESL's balls off a little bit. They've sort of said, you can't be the big dog and then share a little bit. You have to sort of be almost like equal with the other big ones that want to take up the space. So actually, Richard's not wrong. If they cared about this topic, sadly, I don't think they do, as their president, on things like China would suggest. I don't think they really do give a fuck, but you're not wrong. It wouldn't really be like 2 years ago where if you took away the ESL stuff and they said, fuck, we're taking our ball and going home, you would have made CS bereft. It would have been like almost early CSGO at that point in time. It'd be bad.
It would have been easier to make a decision if it was ESL without the Saudi Arabian aspect, I think. Because who wants to be a games development company that makes a stance specifically against the country?
Yeah, that's fair.
And then, you know, what are you inviting there with your stance with China? You know, let's also be real. I mean, But probably not smart to say this, all things considered. Next major obviously is going to be in Shanghai, but people are going to see. It's kind of that's not the exact reality of it, and we've been trying, like Valve has had this relationship with Perfect World in China for a long, long time. And they've done some things themselves as a company where they've had to acquiesce little, things that I know the Valve guys, I don't believe they would be particularly in line with. Like, for example, if you look at what Chinese Steam looks like, and there's about 60 fucking games on it, because every game that's on there has to go through the Chinese Ministry of Culture. Yeah. Obviously, it's fucking absurd, right? And
it's crazy how little culture is in the Chinese Ministry of Culture when you think about it.
Well, dude, mind you, I will also say that how little culture there is in the average Steam game. I get advertised all these anime sex games now, and it's definitely not me. I'm definitely not clicking on them or nothing. But I get advertised about 20 of them every day, and I'm definitely not clicking on them, mate. So I want to make that abundantly clear. So, it's like, obviously, the average Chinese person ain't getting that. They don't know that exists. They think Steam only has 60 games. Valve has to consent to that to be a reality. You could put your foot down at any time and go, we want to sell the full catalog of games to Chinese citizens, but they don't. And so, yeah, you then can't turn around and go, but Saudi Arabia, man, they're out of pocket. Hey, you can't do it. You can't do it. So I understand exactly where they are. It's the thing I've always hated about games developers, because games development companies traditionally are American. Americans, if there's one thing an American loves, that when they wake up, in the fucking morning, right? They love to fucking lecture the rest of the world how they've got it fucking figured out, despite being like 100 and 200 and something years old now. They've got it figured out. Your history is bullshit. Their conceptions of history is the only ones that matter. Their conceptions around race is the only ones that matter. Shut the fuck up and listen, because if you don't, we'll take your Twitter account away. And so this is what you have to do. And the games developers are no fucking different. They want to lecture you every single day about the problems in your country, and you go, you know what, actually, yeah, here I am in Denmark with 150% and renewable energy, and people, a citizenry that don't mind paying 55% tax. We've generally figured out like a lot of the thornier issues about how various groups interact, and it's a nice country, and fucking everybody gets along, and low crime. All right, I listened to an American. I listen to an American fucking tell me what to do. But meanwhile, like Valve will tell, Valve, Riot, all those companies, they'll tell a Danish person how they're fucking their shit up, and they've got to get their shit together, right? And then meanwhile, any thoughts on China, though? Like, any thoughts on China or Saudi or no? None? None? Oh no, because that would be financially fucking inconvenient. And that's the problem, man. I mean, like, I want Valve to be different because they're such a cool company, in the things they create and the way they conceptualize stuff and the way they express themselves. But they're the same fucking American corporate hypocrite when you just boil it down. So, yeah, obviously they're not going to turn around and say ESL, because of their involvement with Saudi Arabia and all the fucked up shit they're going to do, they don't get to host an event in Riyadh every 2 fucking weeks or whatever it's going to be. They could stop that tomorrow. They're not going to. It's too problematic for them.
I mean, I think
I have a question. Oh, go on.
What's interesting, too, is that if one developer actually took a stand, it might cause the rest of them to take a stand, too, which would be welcome to actually stop this shit across esports and not just in Counter-Strike. Because the problem is that while all the other developers are while all the developers are in cahoots together, while Epic and Riot and Valve are all here allowing these games to be run by, at the Esports World Cup, Activision Blizzard, they're all just going to do it together, right? Whereas if there's actually some dissension that takes place, maybe it changes it for multiple devs.
That is the optimistic view. I would cynically say, if anything, the other game devs would just sweeten their deal to just take up the slack. And they just go, oh, brilliant, we just want more money, and then we'll do your
Here's
evil
Valorant.
shit. I have a quick question, which goes like this. As referenced by Messioso earlier, there is also the angle, which I notice, but even though people love to talk about like game companies and, you know, like, no one wants to talk about pro players that have conflicts of interest stuff. You ever noticed that? Because they're your most favorite players. Like, spoiler, here's the reason why that Taz thread of him blatantly cheating on stage, one of the most veteran players of all time, wasn't #1 thread with 20,000 views, like when Simple told me I was a piece of shit. And it didn't have thousands of comments saying, wow, a veteran coach who's coached 10 lands is already cheating in matches. The reason that didn't happen is because everyone, including me, loves Taz. So they wanted to look the other way. So my question, and it has always been this way, it's another example of Valve saying they're going to do something and not doing it, which is years ago they said, because they didn't think it through, you have to disclose all relationships, because I imagine they just thought, we've got like Virtus Pro and Navi now, and then they never thought, what? Wait a minute, players have equity. And yes, dumb fuck. And so what happened was, famously, it was Astralis, because they all had that little equity at one point. So the question always was, does Carrigan have it? Obviously, there's people like Fallen. Did they get anything? When they sold part of their thing to MIBR, did they get a counter swap for some equity? Who can tell? What about people who might have been in Team Liquid, who might be in other teams right now? Whatever those teams might be, it's not their fault. It's up to the player to disclose that. What if they have a tiny bit of equity in Team Liquid?
We did disclose it.
Okay, because this
straight
is the
up
thing.
Disclosed it. And Valve just went, great, thanks, and then just said nothing.
Yeah, this is the weirdest thing. So what they did is, famously, when they brought this in, everyone said, this was actually for the Rio Major, you'll remember, everyone said stuff like, actually, one of the most famous ones for Fallen was, he was in MIBR, but him and a couple of other people had the ownership in that, like, I forget the name even now, that like smaller team. Yeah. Was it Loud at the time? All right, fair enough.
It was Loud,
they had one in a smaller team, basically. And in fact, they even played them in a fucking qualifier for the RMR, because that's how mental Valve is. So Valve, as far as I know, didn't ever actually see that through and tell everyone what would be Richard's solution. Everyone sell their equity. Or do something like, I don't know, there's a trust you can put it into and you can't access it. Something like that. But as far as I know, they never made good on that. And in fact, they not only didn't make good on it, they never really even seemed to talk about it again. And didn't they leave it in some sort of a vague place? Like, to this day, as far as I know, some people might have equity, right?
They do.
I'm wrong. It was Gaming, not Loud.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, you're right.
Yes. Gaming. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, go on, Graham.
I have a more interesting one on that front.
Go for it.
And since it relates to Fallen and the MIBR guys, what about the fact that Fallen has a direct licensee relationship with Valve directly?
Yes, right. Sell stuff through the store, right? The Fallen Gear store.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which means technically he can't play in any Valve major for the last 2-3 years, but it has been. And no one said a word about it.
To be fair, no one probably noticed him. So
I actually did do a video on that topic, I believe. I think I actually did do that, but obviously, look, no one.
You did. It was called Fallen is shit. It's like the real problem with all of this is that Graham hit the nail on the head. It's that once it's almost like a test. Once you disclose, they go, "Thank you," and then that's the end of it. But it's like, no,
they don't even say thank you. And that's what's so funny about the new rules is if they just don't respond for 3 months, it means yes. They can literally say nothing now.
Sure, but I know enough about Valve to know that they'll certainly acknowledge that you've confessed. That they will
confessed, disclosed. Yeah, sure.
yeah.
I like Richard's word.
Good Freudian slip. That's all.
No. Listen, you have to when you understand how every games developer thinks. Biblical language, confessional language, Catholic language is the only language that's vaguely appropriate.
I mean, I can't lie, Richard. I already said this anyway. This is how ridiculous esports has gotten. It is beyond parody. We are just watching an event right now, owned by majority, literally Saudi state, which runs across theocratic lines, and they host an event in the Cathedral of CS, one of the most historic Christian cathedrals in Europe, where they say things like "storm the cathedral." That's an actual part of their marketing. These people don't even fucking learn. They're the one's telling me how to run my Twitter. And then they have a scene where the regular gag is a pro player who was never in any way ordained as a priest, pretends to be a priest within that faith.
Yep.
Imagine doing this for any other religion, by the way. And what he does is receives meme requests in confession, a sacred ritual of Catholicism, in which people actually just confess like the things that are going on. And the joke being like ESL should actually tell us what's going on. Maybe they should go to confession to Valve in this particular scenario. So again, it's always just too on the nose, isn't it? They don't even know how to fucking make this actually funny on the side. And then every fan goes, haha, by now, even though I hated the Flashpoint skits, I've been told every ASL skit is straight fire. What will be the next scene? Maybe a beat for beat, a coffee scene where Stunner and fucking Yanko meet like Pacino and De Niro in Heat and just replace the names with Mad Lib names of pro players. If I have to take you down, Jim, then I don't know if I will, Bit. Well, yeah, if you box me in Monacy, then yeah, anyway, and they get the Oscars. So I think I got lost a bit there with my ESL here, but I'm back. I'll bring it back.
No, listen,
All right,
we're not doing foreplay, but yes, I have seen the secret deleted scenes of Anders as an imam. They exist.
That would be terrifying. All right. I do want to pivot the conversation away from the conflict of interest thing because we've got a lot to get over in not a lot of time.
Yeah.
But first, I will say, guys, if you appreciate the fact that almost everything could be owned by the Saudis by now, but not us, crucially, the only independent media network in esports, then maybe you might consider supporting some of our sponsors, which is the way that we actually continue to do things here at LFN. So,
yes,
one of our sponsors today is, of course, Factor. They've been sponsoring us on Four Horsemen for a while right now. If you are in the United States and you would like to get some never frozen meals delivered to your doorstep, all you have to do is poke some holes in the top, put them in the microwave for 2 minutes, and there you go. Healthier most of the time, because I know you guys aren't ordering the best stuff when you order out, cheaper as well.
Correct.
And it really does take the stress out of your life a little bit. Have to do a little less meal planning, have to make a fewer bad decisions, maybe when it comes to your eating habits, because it'll be right there in your fridge waiting for you, instead of you having to do really anything at all. So, guys, if you would like to subscribe to Factor, now is a great time to do it. You can head to factormeals.com/horsemen50. That's horsemen, plural, MEN. And use code horsemen50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code horsemen50 at factormeals.com/horsemen50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off for next month while your subscription is active. And as usual, best way to support us, support our sponsors. I have a couple more of the show as well. All right.
So, Graham, how does Elish like his Factor when you have to mix it up for him?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Spoon-fed, maybe. Spoon-fed.
Every now and then I mix up his pre-game powder drink sometimes, and I always ask what's in it. And I never want to.
Speaking of which, Factor also can put protein shakes into your box as an add-on. So if you are looking to increase performance, there you go.
I wish you'd stop saying that, but that's fine. Means something different to us British people.
I understand that could be inferred in a negative way or a different way. Negative, maybe not.
Depends.
Depends on
really depends.
All right. So moving on, I do want to talk, Messioso, about the team's perception of what's going on, because honestly, I've heard some of the teams say that when we talk about the dismantling of these partnered leagues like EPL and Blast, and Flashpoint was previously dismantled, part of the problem with running an esports org in general is consistency of money, and this made it so there was a baseline revenue that teams had access to. And I've heard some teams say they think that this actually gives the TOs more power in a way, because now they aren't beholden to the partner teams. It also upsets their finances. And remember that, especially when we think about the Louvre agreement, which governed EPL, that was very much negotiated against Flashpoint. So the teams got actually pretty favorable terms because they were playing Flashpoint and ESL off each other in order to get those agreements that were still standing. So what do you think about this as a team? Do you see this as an opportunity to attend more events? Is it more more of a question mark in terms of the revenue that you can earn? Because in theory now, EPL or these Blast exist, but they don't have to share the revenue anymore, really, right?
Yeah, I think there's there's a lot of things at play. My first initial thought when I heard it all was that Blast and ESL would be super happy because hey, we no longer have these long-term commitments. All the rev share, everything else. They could technically just back out. They could pay nothing, and but the thing that's countering that is going to be the competition from the other tournament organizers that they now have to fend off. So, whilst they may not be beholden to the teams as much, they do have to now compete with PGL and StarLadder and Yalla Compass if they come in as well. So, I don't necessarily think they are super happy because, they had a thing that was going and it was, now they don't know what the evil is that they have to fight, so to speak. I know that's a bad phrasing there, I think, considering, but sorry, I didn't say it. So yeah, I think on the tournament organizer perspective, I think they are 50-50 on it. I don't think they necessarily think it's a great thing or a good thing because they don't know how it's going to play out. They don't know what competition is going to come in, and that the fear of the unknown is the biggest thing. From a team perspective, I mean, yeah, you touched on it a bit. I have had the luxury of the last nearly 3 years now of being part of Complexity. We're partners with both ESL and Blast, so it's been good. There's no doubt about that. And I understand fully why Valve wanted to do what they've done, and it's definitely going to be a different revenue model, different financial model going into the next few years for a lot of teams. Some teams are earning a lot more than other teams. You could probably have a guess which teams weren't earning as much, but so the come down for them is maybe less because they weren't earning as much to begin with, so they haven't got to make up the revenue gap quite as significantly. We are probably in the lower end, but definitely not. There's definitely still going to be a pretty significant gap for us to make up, which I think Jason's already touched upon it a little bit in his State of the Org he did a few weeks ago. So if you haven't watched that, go watch that. He touches on the finances around Complexity a little bit. So yeah, we've definitely got a bit of a gap, but we're not too worried about it. New events coming in is good in some ways, but the biggest concern right now is Blast have already gone out and announced their revenue share model for next year. They've committed to, I can bring it up somewhere, $6 million, which is more than anyone else has announced thus far. So, that's good. There's some caveats in there for sure. The
some
frequent
big
flyer,
ones, you might say.
Yeah, the frequent flyer aspect of it, which is $2 million, requires that you cannot decline a single event that you were invited for with Blast, which is essentially pseudo franchising, but we're not calling it franchising.
Oh no.
So if you want the money, you got to play, right? So that's obviously a little bit concerning because the calendar has multiple events in it, and I think, at least with Blast, we're not too worried about, flying to the end of the earth. But for example,
another problem also for you must be now with the whole ranking thing. In theory, you have to weigh up which events to attend in case you need the points, and so then if there's any overlap, in this case, maybe not with Blast, but that could be a concern down the line, right?
Yeah, definitely, and that was, we can get into much deep. I could talk about this for years, honestly, but the whole aspect of when Valve added that 8-week rule in a few weeks ago, to me,
the 8-week rule, for context, was that they were giving people 8 weeks to get visas for events, right? Which is basically impossible for, I don't know, Russians visiting the US, for example. Anyone visiting China, by the way. Also, anybody visiting China virtually.
Yeah, so the 8-week rule, the issue with that I had with that was that 8 weeks is too short of a lead time going into many events. It's fine if you're a European team going to a European event, no problems at all. But if you're any sort of, I don't want to say third world, but third world passports. So I've got 2 South Africans on my team trying to get UK visa, Schengen visa, P1. They literally can't go to anywhere that plays Counter-Strike except for Serbia without a visa, right? So we're very on top of that, and we've got things sorted out, and JT has a Portuguese passport now, so we're pretty good with that. But there is a potential that teams like that. I can imagine a lot of the Asian teams, especially, could have trouble with
Mongols,
that. CIS teams,
the Mongols, especially as the Mongols get bigger, like that Mongolian visa is going to be tough in a lot of parts of the world.
And Chinese teams getting visas to everywhere, it disproportionately affected the teams that need the help
Nothing
most.
more tougher than a Russian visa right now. Let's be real about it.
But there's the other thing. The reason it's also such insanely bad timing from Valve is we've just found out that it's way harder for Russians who don't. But here's the thing: if people don't know, I've heard some of them that are Russian just got the Serbian passport now, so they're doing the EU thing again, sort of, right? So it might be easy for those guys in certain orgs. But put it this way: everyone made this about the player Dexter from Heroic. It wasn't just him. Spoiler: a team called BetBoom was supposed to be at IM Cologne. They weren't, of course, because they didn't get their visas. So that's why they didn't attend an entire team of players. So you think to yourself, Team Spirit is one of the best teams in the world. Again, I imagine Monty on G2 will have it figured out. But you know what I mean? It gets pretty tough. VP, you wouldn't, I mean, they're technically not a Russian org, but the players are Russian. So, and it's the reason why it's so mad they would even implement that is it implies Valve doesn't even know what happens in the CS circuit. Like, again,
I walk it back.
It'd be one thing if the Mongols is the one that they didn't know about. If you don't know about Team Spirit, you don't watch Counter-Strike. That's it. It's just it.
I don't want to get into it because otherwise we'll be here all day and we'll be on the unpopular side of the fence. But this week, it just reiterated everything I wrote probably at the start of the conflict, which was that ultimately putting these expectations on Russian people to sort of jump through these hoops, even to their own detriment, to appease a global community, sort of isn't fair. But there was a story like 2 days ago. A Russian woman has been imprisoned for 12 years in Russia because she gave $51 to a Ukrainian charity. As an act of protest against the war. And I do just want to remind all the fucking morons on Reddit who were demanding that their favorite Russian player came out and publicly took a stance. This is the penalty you were asking them to pay to play a video game. And so, yes, right now, it's very hard for Russians to get visas. And I imagine many of you aren't going to be sympathetic about that. Well, the alternative is they can not have the visa, come out, say the thing you want them to say, and go to prison for a little bit. I guess that's better, isn't it? I fucking hate the fans in this space. You are morons. So, right now, if you want it, we've got a fantastic Russian scene. We've got fantastic Russian talent. A lot of them have managed to break through the problem by having dual Serbian visas. That's why you're never going to see Munisi get jammed up or a player like that. But there's some players on Spirit, for example. There's some players on other teams. Dexter obviously is the one in everyone's minds right now. They might never get to play at a European tournament ever again. They certainly won't. If you
Imagine
say
if Electronic
you've got
can't ever play
weeks.
again. He's a major winner. He's the kind of winner. What, he's now can't play in our circuit. What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that even the Serbia out isn't a complete out because that still doesn't get you into the US. It still doesn't get you into the UK.
Ah, sure.
As we saw with Munisi going to the Blast Finals like 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
he still had to get a visa. Like the Serbian visa is still like way behind any of our passports, for example. Like UK, US, all the real European countries, so to speak, like the EU countries, like their passports are light years ahead of any of those countries.
And so, me and Duncan can testify. Back in happier times, we both had we both went through processes to get our first visa to go and work at E-League. It took me 12 weeks, and it took Duncan 16, right?
I had the mad one where
XP1 took a year.
I had the one where even though, like, obviously, I mean, here's the joke. I'll tell a very brief anecdote. The joke is before my visa got done, I even was the reference letter for DDK who was accepted. So the basis was I'm the esports historian. So I'm an expert about esports. So when I tell you who DDK is, that proves who he is. Approved that visa. Then my visa, they said, had insufficient evidence. And so we not only had to, even though if that makes sense in your brain. And not only did he have to submit more evidence, like old website links from like archive.org or whatever, but even more mental, like the governor of Atlanta had to go like, no, he really is who he says he is. Like, and put like a fucking actual like letter in through his office. Or it was, that was just like 12 weeks for me. That's why I wasn't there for the first week.
E-League had to get actual politicians involved to get Duncan a fucking visa in time.
So they might regret now. I can't lie. You know, that probably was a misstep, but it's all good.
So
did game.
So when we look ahead to the circuit, like obviously Valve, the reason why they did this, and Richard, you said that you celebrated this at first, is it's a dismantling over a monopolistic structure that was starting to take hold. The stranglehold of the scene was becoming more and more intense, particularly from the ESL side. And, prior to them being purchased too. So prior to them at the Faceit merger, obviously, like I was working with Faceit before they got purchased by the Saudi government because they were the, production company and tournament operator for Flashpoint. And they were, a competitor to ESL at that time. But ESL did have at one time this stranglehold that you guys referred to over the circuit, not only because of EPL, but because they would literally just fill the entire calendar with garbage to prevent other people from doing things.
They even scheduled events like one day after their rival ECS, so that like famously there's a couple of times that the winner had to just fly immediately and just instantly play a game, like mental shit like that, where you're obviously doing it for like anti-competitive reasons.
Yes. And
look,
especially during the COVID times, they would just schedule all these like additional online events. And you're
not even looking at how petty they actually were. They used to show their reruns when people ran their events. They would.
And when you did a major that wasn't ESL, they'd start selling tickets for Kelowna, kind of each one. I was like, right through that week. They would announce mental tickets for that shit. Yeah. They were the pettiest.
Like, put it this way. I went a long time thinking like, wow, ESL really are fucking gross. Like, it's actually ridiculous how fucking they're so over the top petty. But what I realized is it's just esports, man. Like, right.
The others didn't have their chance yet, right, Rich? We've learned the hard way.
We've learned exactly. All you have to do is show me that you can wield power, and I will support you. But they none of them do.
No,
like, face it with the funniest. I don't want to derail the show too much, but I can tell you there isn't a Faceit executive that I haven't had dinner with or had drinks with or hung out with.
I had that scene. I basically had the scene from Revenge of the Jedi, which is like, or Sith or whatever it was, where basically they were telling me at Flashpoint, like, together we will destroy the ESL. And then like 2 years later, they're like, we announce a merger with ESL. It's like, you're supposed to destroy them, not join them. But
it was like that. And you have got the beard for it, mate. But yeah, it was like that's what they were like. Like you would sit down and they would say like, "Oh, they're doing all this fucked up shit, Rich. You wouldn't believe it, man. We're like clinging on to life, but we're never gonna give up. We are the Resistance." And I would go to Wicked having dinner with the Resistance. Fucking love hanging out with the Resistance, mate. It's good. It's good to be a proxy for the Resistance, right? And then you fast forward like 18 months from when things are really ramping up, and they turn around and they go, "Yeah, listen, we've been bought out by ESL." And you go, yeah, but you never worked for them, right? You never. Oh, no, we're all vice presidents now. So fuck you.
And you're blacklisted,
fuck
Richard.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, you're blacklisted from ever working with us. So
remember how we used to be cool? Well, we decided that you are. In fact, Richard, the real evil was you the whole time. We agree.
Yeah, and look, here's the other unspoken part of that, and then we'll go back to the main topic. But just to get it all in, like Faceit got bought, whatever, right? It happens. You get bought, and you have to fucking, one minute you're like, yeah, fuck Carmack, or fuck Ralph Rijkaard, or whoever it is, and then the next minute you're like wiping your mouth, going, he was all right, and he's a good lad. But Blast are the weird anomaly in all of this, because what I don't think a lot of people realize is basically, Blast used to be the same as Face It. They used to fucking detest ESL. They were the resistance. They were like, we're gonna make our own show and we're gonna put them to shame and we're gonna have our own ideas and our production is gonna shame them. And by the way, for a long time, it did, not at first, if you remember your history, but it's gonna put them to shame. And then they didn't get bought. And in fact, if you want to know what ESL executives say behind the scenes, they say we don't need to buy Blast. We'll just erode them. We'll just bring them to heel like dogs. That's how they think about Blast. They hire all of their like best staff, and now they just say, look, do you want to play nice with us, or do you want to be like, do you want to be a true resistance like fucking PGL or Starladder or whatever it might be? And Blast have gone, oh well, whatever crumbs from the table of the Empire are the most delicious crumbs, and they take them. And so Blast have this weird relationship with ESL right now, where they're kind of pseudo in cahoots with each other. And this makes it harder for any of these new entities to come in. Basically, Blast are the kind of almost like useful idiot drone for ESL right now. They cooperate on everything. They discuss calendar dates. They discuss, major dates. Who's getting this? That's what's going on behind the scenes right now. Everybody knows it, by the way. It's like this is an open secret. But it's like it's kind of crazy that ESL still weren't so sure in themselves, despite having the Saudi money, the monopoly, the Esports World Cup, seemingly just total a blind spot from Valve as to their bullshit, that they still felt they needed a little ally, and that's who Blast are. And that's kind of where the scene is at right now. Anyone else is like, you very much are on your own, and they are going to pull all sorts of dirty bullshit on you. Like Starladder coming back out of nowhere. Good luck, man. Like, they're gonna fucking destroy you. They are going to destroy you. I hope you make no mistakes in your production. PGL, we've already seen it. We've already seen like how it operates between ESL and Blast and PGL and the things they say. We already know how players will go to a PGL event and say, bloody hell, these PCs are shit, and look at they're the worst. I've never had a worse PC. They go and use the exact same spec at ESL and say nothing. Why is that? Why is that happening? It's the game. There is a meta game being played on top of this game.
Thing is, Monty, it is just a dirty, dirty business, but I don't want to be in that business. I want to be in the business of cleaning up the dirt. So the thing is, this show is sponsored by Mandor. Now, what's the most valuable thing in the world? I would say it would be Liverpool's gegenpressing, holding up without enough breaks in the defense for them to score two beautiful, well-earned goals against a dogshit team like Ipswich. But you know what the second most valuable thing would be? Time. Without time, nothing can exist, nothing can grow, nothing can change. We can't experience those beautiful moments. So the more time we can get back for ourselves, isn't that really the secret to life? Well, managing and wondering about your body odor, and boy, does this industry stink, used to take up a lot of my time. I was paranoid about smelling, especially around midday, but I actually have those wipes now, so I don't have to worry. It can be time consuming, right? But if you switch to Mandor whole body deodorant, you can free up that time. It's really easy to use, it's effective, and it's long lasting. Because here's the thing, Mandor doesn't just cover up odor after the fact with heavy fragrances, much like an esports org might do something corrupt and then just offer something as aesthetic to you fans to make themselves appear like the smell of sweet success and integrity. So other deodorants do that. This stops odor at the source. Valve, you can stop this at the source. You know about source, mate. You should have stopped that game too. You can cover it up at the source by blocking the bacteria on your skin from eating your sweat, which is the actual cause of BO. Who knew? So that means basically it's clinically proven to control odor for up to 72 hours. So give yourself the precious gift of time and get yourself some Mandor whole body deodorant. Special offer. New customers get $5 off Mandor's best-selling starter pack with code HORSEMAN at shopmandor.com. This is a product that is aluminium free, it's baking soda free, it's cruelty free, it's dye free, it's vegan free. I just want Counter-Strike to be free. Well, Mando's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like mini body wash and deodorant wipes. I recommend the wipes, are pretty good if you stream, and free shipping. Luckily, I have a discount code to help you get hooked on my favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. That's literally true. I don't have another one, believe it or not. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code HORSEMAN at ShopMando, SHOPMAND.com. Thank you to Mando and people who support our channel by getting great products and getting 40% off and getting a starter pack. Stop stinking.
Well, we hope
not really the way the copy was written. But
that might be the best ad read we've ever done on
it. Wasn't bad.
He crushes them all the time.
You thought it was me.
Transition was amazing,
first, didn't you? I know. You thought I was actually talking about like sports and shit. Nah, it was all for the show.
I know when they're coming now. I have the sixth sense for them, but they still.
Okay.
Yeah,
to be fair, for some reason, when me and Duncan did podcasts together, they never got sponsored. So
I know what's going on.
We never had to worry about doing an ad read.
All right, change that anytime you like. Also, I wasn't there to do it, so times have changed, Richard.
By the way, I even have my own issues. Like, if I ever do those videos everyone loves, where I wreck an industry figure, or I do like Thorin versus like Blocked or whatever, all of them get the ad revenue taken off because I won't stop saying my favorite word, that is cunt. And what I realized was, just calculated in my brain, mate, if it's only like $100, I'd pay $100 to call these guy cunts. So I just pay it at this point in time. That's for free. I'm just doing that one for myself. You got to give yourself a gift every now and then.
You did it again. I just wait every episode until it drops, and I'm like, yep, there it is. Goodbye.
Timestamp and bleep it out.
YouTube.
No, we do. You have to bleep it out now. I'm so sick of YouTube, man. It's fucked up. Even the fucks. Too many fucks. And it's gone, right, man.
Too many fucks. Too many fucks.
But enough about ESL. But enough about ESL.
Yeah. All right. You worked with him.
I did.
You were consulting with him.
Yeah, you were saying what you should do is have you called Mohammed bin Salman, because he's itching to get into this business. And,
that was me. Yeah, I set up the deal.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
In any case, I do want to talk about so we could transition into what the scene used to be like. So we hinted at the way that the tournament operations used to run. Now I'm shitting you not, guys, because obviously I was doing this and I was part of this. There used to be a Google spreadsheet that all the tournament operators were invited to. That was a calendar of like the next 2 years of Counter-Strike.
Graham knows more about this than anyone on this call, mate.
Did you make it? Did you make that thing?
No, the original creator of that was Alexander Neer from ESL.
Yes.
I think he's still there. But I was in there since like 2012 or something until Blast. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously with Flashpoint, I was in there for a number of years as well. And what this was for a very long time was basically just like this Wild West homesteading land grab, where you basically had these windows in the calendar and you just plopped your events in there and like dared anybody to stop you from doing them or to try and conflict with you. And then you wrote passive aggressive emails to each other about who got which slots. Anyway,
but that's basically how it's going to be next year. That's exactly the same.
It's back. We're so back.
Nothing has changed about event organizing except for the fact that there's more organizers now. And yeah, you're right. You're right in saying that Blast and ESL typically scheduled around each other a little bit. I don't think their relationship is super great, because I know that Blast took a lot of other business from them. Right. Rainbow Six.
But you're talking about the mythical Fortnite business.
Which nobody makes money.
I don't want to get sidetracked in this. That's a different show.
No, I won't. But I will just say they took it by undercutting them. I believe to zero, is what I got told. As in, we will just do it. Don't worry about paying us. We'll figure out how to make money off it down the road. And by the way, ESL were kind of like, because fucking Fortnite's fucked. So we'll leave it there. We'll shelve that. Another episode. Dirty esports, we'll call that episode. But
by the way, I'll even give you a prediction as to how the current calendar that's announced, that totally doesn't have too many overlaps, will end up being used, weaponized against other TOs. Here's what you do. You announce all the stuff, you get all the teams to agree, you wait until the point where they can't agree to go to the other event, and then you have some mad thing like a scheduling issue where you have to like move it a couple of days later or change the venue or so, oh, fuck, what can we do? Damn it. That's the classic one. So get ready for that one. I'm thinking of all the angles here.
Game of chicken is coming.
Anyway, one thing that is changing is the advance notice that you have to schedule things, which I think is very interesting because now they're basically saying, you know, they're moving slowly year by year over the next couple of years to a 2-year period where things have to be announced, dates have to be announced, locations have to be announced, which I think will stop some of the skullduggery that was going on with the calendar of people like scheduling things, you know, so with a limited amount of time in advance. Now, it has to be said that this is only for the tier 1 events, and tier 1 are the events that invite the top 8 teams in the world to them, whereas tier 2 can be they're a little bit more flexible, right? You for a tier 2 event where you invite either teams from a specific region, but it has to be like starting at the 9th team, according to the Valve, regional ranking system. But for the tier 1 events, which means like the biggest events in the world that you want to know about that are going to have all the best teams there, basically for events starting the 1st of January 2025. So for all of 2025, we have to hear about those events. They have to be announced no later than September 1st. So within the next 2 weeks is going to be the deadline for that. For events starting in 2026, the announcement date has to be no later than the 1st of January 2025. So those could be anywhere from 1 to 2 years in advance. And if they're starting in 2027, the announcement date has to be 2 years in advance. So we're going to know well ahead of time where the majors are, you know, the existence of these big tier 1 events, which I do think will help make them better planned and help make them more exclusive, because planning 2 years in advance is like very serious, right? We're going to have a really complete calendar of what the seminal events in Counter-Strike are going to be, which really hasn't existed in this way before with so much advance notice. Thoughts?
Well, I'm looking forward to the next second major of 2025 being announced in 13 days.
Yep.
If Valve are going to stick to their own rules,
right.
it has to be announced.
You're right.
September 1st, right? So that's the first thing I'll throw out there. I want to make sure Valve stick to their own rules. The second thing is
Birmingham.
Exactly. The second thing is there's nothing to stop people just blocking out dates in the calendar, getting a license for an event, and then just canceling it 6 months before. So you can still fuck with people by just arranging events. If anyone wonders,
by the way, why we're taking such a cynical view, it's impossible to be too cynical about the esports industry, guys. It's just the nature of it.
Yeah, I'm still expecting when we get to like the 2026 and 2027 calendar, I'm still expecting like events to get thrown in the calendar and then just magically not happen or get moved or something. But yeah, being hopeful, I think it will help fix a lot of the problems, because 2 years is a decent amount of time to be quite committed to running an event. But at the same time, it's also enough time that you can just cancel it and never actually have any real reason.
Well, presumably you have to have a venue booked, because you have to have
logically
an announcement made, and you couldn't do that a tier 1 event, which we assume is going to be in some sort of like multi-thousand person arena.
So you deposit though.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit vague, because the only thing they ask you to say is the location. Now, does that mean the country, the city, the arena? Like, we don't know. So, yeah, it could be a bit vague on that. You know, you could have the country as the UK, and then you could still have 5 different venues across London, Birmingham, Manchester that you could pick from. So you still have the time to be flexible. So, yeah, maybe there's flexibility there. But, yeah, you would assume that TOs would want to lock in locations. You know, I'm sure ESL will want to get the Lanxess Arena booked in 2 years in advance anyway. I'm sure they probably already do have that. So, yeah, I don't think for some of like the legacy events it's a big problem, but I think for any like, I don't know, like a Star Ladder perhaps,
what?
You know,
Spodek is hopping, man. Like they that place is booked out in Katowice. What are you talking about?
But I mean, look, there's gonna be some other people that they do want to roll the dice and have some interesting events in some different places. I mean, this is another advantage that these rules, whether or not Valve are aware, they play to ESL. ESL has the infrastructure, they have the deals with these cities where they're going to have regular events there. You know, they're not just booking them on a yearly basis, they're booking them in advance. All of their stuff now is planned so far ahead because, I mean, even their sponsorship deals are, you know, everything's 5 years. So it's like, if you're a new upstart organization, let's say Flashpoint was to get resurrected, or, you know, whoever, Starladder coming back, whoever it might be, and you say, hey, we want to have this event here, and you're kind of doing it the old school esports way, seat your pants, you could have some problems, and if you run into those problems, then you're just going to get the license pulled, and you're going to lose a fuck ton of money. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you should. I'm not against that idea, but, you know, just so Valve are aware, you know, we've kind of had an ecosystem where everything has been done on spec. Like, it's all done pretty much short notice.
To this day, I think
kind
they still hire
change it.
people for certain events like a month before. That's still a thing for talent, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, no, of course it is. I mean, like the average talent, I didn't even want to get into that. They don't fucking know what's going on. I mean, like, well, put it this way, they all said the same thing to me. The guys I talked to, they were all like, what, like 8 weeks? Like, like no, like 8 weeks would be a godsend. You know, for a player or a team, 8 weeks is inconvenient. For broadcast talent, eight weeks would be amazing. You know, they'd fucking love that.
You know, it's also, I mean, from the talent perspective too, this also, in the same way that it affects the team's guaranteed money, you know, a lot of the talent had signed up to be like the official ESL guys, and that means that they had, you know, they were able to make a lot of money over the calendar. But if ESL's doing fewer events, you know, the tournament organizers, sure, they're going to want the best talent, but they're also going to want to differentiate themselves from each other a little bit. And also, you know, famously, Blast and ESL have been pretty petty about hiring each other's talent in the, you know, in events. So like for talent now,
you will notice that is falling by the wayside lately as well. This is another you know, more proof, if anyone needed, of the little esports glasnost that has been going on between Blast and ESL. You know, for instance, and you know, I hate calling this stuff out. I even catch myself, you know, saying, you know, talking about the HLTV podcast stuff again. I shouldn't bring this up because it is going to affect people on the ground who've got nothing to do with this and just want to work. So, you know, apologies for referencing that earlier, and apologies for referencing this, but it remains true. If we go back a year, ESL would never have done an incredible profile on Launders. They wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't. They would. Because he's the Blast guy. They wouldn't have done it, and they did it, and it's great. And by the way, Launders, if you know him, if you haven't seen it, he has a super cool, amazing story. He's such a fucking wholesome guy, such a great dude who's really come up from nothing to be where he is today. It's why I never really took the fucking slander against him. You know, like, he is another one of these guys who, like, it not in the same way me and Duncan do it, but like, he really breathes Counter-Strike and deserves all of the success. And it's like, you know, it needed, you needed a profile like that to showcase who he is and where he's from, but that would never have happened. And then ESL are like, oh, he works for us now, so, you know, he does our events, you know, we get the benefit of his incredible talent. So here's an incredible documentary about his life, 30 minutes. That doesn't happen 12 months ago. Why does it happen now? Because Blast and ESL are like, okay, yeah, if there has to be an axis of evil, let it be us. It's fucked up. But it's fucked up how transparent it is.
I mean, it's nice in that way, but my point is like, with more players entering the field, like, you're going to have people who want to differentiate themselves, like I said, which means that it's going to open up opportunities for new talent. But a lot of the talent who have been on top of the scene may have fewer opportunities than they did before, or it may be dangerous for them to jeopardize their current relationship by working with certain rivals, especially up and coming ones, and legitimizing them, right? Because if you're ESL or Blast and there's somebody else new or somebody like Starladder who's being revived, do you want your talent going there to legitimize them? And of course, they'll never say anything, but
No.
But what the effect is that they deprioritize you, and maybe you don't get as many gigs with them anymore, and somebody else becomes the golden child, right? So I think this is a complicated situation for talent to navigate, because that they really haven't been brought up in any of the conversations I've seen about this. But as a former caster, like, my mind immediately springs to that.
Exclusivity contracts have been drafted, and they're getting more and more, they're getting more and more.
Well, I hope people get paid well for
explicit.
exclusivity. That's what I think.
I mean, put it this way, dude, like, the fucking teams, like, have you read between the lines on some of this shit? Again, like, this is where we bring Graham in. Like, I don't know what this stuff means long term for teams, but there is certainly verbiage in the contracts and the agreements that make me think. Like, say, for example, the Esports World Cup. Well, but rather, not the Esports World Cup teams, the Qiddiya teams, assuming they are not one and the same. The Qiddiya deal, where you get an office in Qiddiya and you have to hire six executives from the Middle East and all of this stuff. The agreement seems to be explicitly baked in there. If you take money from anyone else, any of these other programs, i.e. Blast's, frequent flyer program, you would be excluded from having the rest of the contract. And I'm seeing more and more kind of verbiage baked into these programs, these money-making programs, which makes it sound like you need to choose and pick one. And even though Blast and ESL seem to have this alliance right now, I'm pretty sure there's some grounds for interpretation, right? That, like, maybe you have to pick one or the other.
Yeah,
No?
that's nothing that I'm aware of, but we're also not involved in Qiddiya, EWC, or anything like that. So
Yeah,
not
Yeah,
really
but,
relevant to us, and nothing I've had to look over.
Also, for partnered teams with the Esports World Cup, isn't that potentially a conflict of interest, because they're partnered teams with the tournament organizer? That's if the Esports World Cup is owned by the Saudi Arabian government and operated by them, then they are partners with the same ownership entity that is ESL, that owns ESL. So what's that?
Yeah.
Like, you're getting rid of partnered leagues, but we didn't get rid of partnership systems, because the whole purpose of the Esports World Cup and the partnered organizations is to provide payments and to provide loyalty to Saudi Arabia. That's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah,
So,
I think we touched on that earlier, didn't we?
If it helps as well, I'll just put this out there. One of the, let's say, a high-ranking ESL executive said explicitly, this was their fuck you to Valve. That's how they framed it to me. So
I wonder how that'll go for them.
Well, I mean,
sorry, listen, Graham, you're not in Congress, mate. You can just say you don't want to talk about it if you can. You don't have to.
No, I don't know enough about it, so like, I don't have. As I said, like, we're not involved in either of the programs, so it's hard for me to say anything. Like, if you ask me,
I know
Richard's
throwing some grenades in it, so it's all
no,
good.
but like, my personal opinion is like, yeah, you shouldn't be able to play in EWC as a CS event if you are a partner team.
Yes.
Like, that's pretty clear, because it violates essentially the same problem we have right now.
Yep.
Well, remains to be seen if that comes around next year, what happens. Maybe EWC just drops Counter-Strike, and a bit like the Falcons thing, just Falcons just drop CS and they continue, and everything, all the issues are resolved in theory. But I don't know what will happen. I doubt that will happen. But that would be the logical conclusion based on Valve's rulings. But whether Valve are going to enforce this to the letter of the law, I somehow doubt. I don't think they have the capacity to do that. I strongly believe, seeing these rules, that Valve need to hire someone to dedicatedly manage Counter-Strike. I think that's my biggest concern right now. Is I think they've set themselves up to fail by making the restrictions so like expansive, and I just don't think they have the capacity. Because bear in mind, like we all know, like these are just the developers of the game.
Yes.
Like day to day, they're fixing the game. They're trying to, well, they're meant to be fixing the game and adding new features. Everything else.
Be careful, mate. Don't say they're doing that. People don't like it when you say that.
Yeah, so they're like that's their day-to-day job, and then on the side of it, it feels like they're trying to sort of shimmy in and fix esports, but they haven't got like a dedicated resource to do that, and I just don't see how they're going to manage all of this.
Yeah,
and then as soon as we start throwing like investigate Saudi Arabia and all their ties to all these teams, and can you prove and not prove, I just don't think they're going to do it.
Well, it's also that it comes down to them, accepting tournament applications and making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed when it comes to, the applications that tournament organizers are probably going to have to submit for these events, because we can go into this right now. There are now rules for events. It's not just like, oh, the TO kind of does whatever they want, and if Valve doesn't like it, they say something, which is kind of how it used to be. Or, Valve would say, well, there has to be some sort of open qualifier element, which was true of Flashpoint, of EPL, of Blast. But oftentimes, as we know, these open qualifiers were absurd in their length and difficulty to qualify for, whereas a lot of, obviously the partner teams just got right into the main event, right? So they're trying to quash that. But it is, somebody at Valve is going to have to take a look at all of the events now and say like, okay, this event is approved for tier 1 basically. And it's not, you can't just say, oh, it's tier 1. Like now it has to be, okay, like you have to determine whether it's a tier 1 or tier 2 event, and a tier 1 has certain parameters, which means that when you invite teams, if you want to be a tier 1 event, you have to start with the number 1 team in the ranking system, and then you have to go down that list 1.5 times the number of teams you want to show up. So if you want 16 teams to show up at your event, you have to invite the top 24 teams in order to participate, because some of them might bow out. And I'm interested in hearing from you, Messioso, because this is interesting math you're going to have to do, because in order to be high on the rankings, you have to attend events, but maybe you don't want to tire out all your players by attending all the events. So how do you know which tournaments to like accept or not, or like turn down? It becomes very, very complicated, because if you just sit there and don't go to events for too long, your ranking drops, and then you're not actually invited potentially to tier 1 events anymore, right? So it becomes really fucking hard. Like this system is enormously complicated.
It's enormously complicated, and the biggest issue we're facing right now is that we just don't have enough information on the different TOs, what they're going to run. The way the Valve world ranking works
what are you talking about? They have 2 weeks left to announce all their events for next year. How are you saying you don't have the information?
Well, we've got good dates. We know the dates, but like we don't know, for example, prize pools. Prize pool pays heavily into the Valve world ranking as it works right now. A $1 million event is essentially worth 100%, and every single match win you get in that is worth 100%. If you run an event that's like 250k, it's only worth like 50%. So like you get a win against Na'Vi, great, but it's only worth 50% of what it would have been if you'd beaten them in the other event that was a $1 million event. So like you have to factor in prize money, you have to factor in, are they going to offer rev share? I think the biggest thing I'm looking at next year is that the teams are going to be pit against their own players, because they're both of their incentives will not align anymore. They used to align fine. We go to an ESL, we go to Blast. That's the best thing for both of us. It's great.
The team gets paid by ESL and the players win prize money, is what you're saying.
And again, very privileged position that I've been in the last 3 years with Complexity. I'm not obscuring that fact. It's been great. It's coming to an end. We have to move on. But next year, it's like, okay, you can go to PGL, and what I hear from PGL, this is speculation on my part, is they're going to run $1 million events with no rev share for the teams. So obviously that's great. Prize money is heavily shifted towards players in the ecosystem, somewhere in the 80, 85, 90% typically, going towards the team roster, and then 10% to the organization. So $1 million sounds great for the players, but if the team is not making any revenue from that event, then we're going to want to go to the Blast event, where we can notch up that frequent flyer, get that invite for that event. So there's obviously going to be that aspect. And then the way the ranking works, it's essentially an elo-based system. So the better teams you beat, the more ranking points you earn. So if you're not going to the event that has all the best teams in it, you're not going to be able to earn the ranking points by
and you might
beating
lose
them,
a lot.
in theory.
Which if you think about it,
you won't. Yeah, you won't lose a lot if you lose to good teams. You might lose 5 or 6. If you lose to bad teams,
exactly. So
holy shit.
If your players, like, if it's a smaller prize pool event and your players aren't maybe on their best form or aren't taking it too seriously, and you get upset, like the damage to your ranking could be massive in that case.
Yeah, for example, like
by the way, that's also the opposite what we used to do in Counter-Strike, because in Counter-Strike, what you would do is, your team's a perfect example. If you have one event where you know, like, the prize money is limited, so it's not even that mega for the players anyway, maybe you go to the other event and that's a chance to win prize money and to get a top placing. And so now essentially it's just going to encourage everyone to just rush the biggest event.
Yeah, the world ranking incentivizes things incorrectly. I hope Valve will try and account for the TOs that are doing rev share. I hope they try and account for the rev share value into the calculation for the world ranking. So like Blast have got $6 million spread over 6 events. Put $1 million per event. It doesn't work out that way, but, like, you know, figure out a way with Blast or whatever to accurately distribute that money so that it counts towards the Valve World Ranking in an effective way against prize money, because it's still money that's being offered up by the tournament organizer. It's just in a different pot. But, like, I think that is the first thing that I would do, is make sure that that's in there so that organizers that are actively still trying to support the teams are not just hindered by another organizer just putting everything into prize money. That would be the first thing I would fix on that front. And then, yeah, when it comes to the events, like, I mean, as a North American team, like, if you look at the rankings, if we went back and played in a North American event and got upset just once, like, it wouldn't be worth playing. It would just be a complete shit show. Like, the how do you say, like,
you destroy all the grassroots scenes.
Yeah, it's essentially like there's
we're kind of late to that party. Let's be real. NA is dead as fuck.
Sure.
I don't think it would affect. I think South America would be fine because they have a pretty strong base. But, like, us going back to North America would be stupid. Like, if we went back and played like like BO1s online, like, if we lose one of those, we could lose so many points. The Mongols going back to China, they lost 2 BO1s in the Blast qualifier and they lost like 70 points. Like, it's less like 10 ranks sometimes. Like, it's just not worth the risk of doing it, especially in BO1s. Like, we went to that Yellow Compass event. We flew from Dallas straight to Abu Dhabi overnight and played the next day. And my God, what a shit show that was. Like, that wasn't worth the risk anymore. And it will definitely not be worth the risk next year. So, like, already this year, we're already thinking about it. Like, we got invited to go to Elisa Masters, I think it was, which was like the day after we got back from IEM Rio. And it's like Brazil to Helsinki, play the next day. Like, nah, not worth it for us. So, but, you know, typically it would be, because there's no, like, if you, in the current, like, Valve and ESL world rankings, which are the two that have been used for most invites, mostly the ESL world rankings has been used for invites, there's no jeopardy involved, because if you go and you suck, you don't lose anything. Like, the other teams that are there will gain, but you don't lose anything. But now you actively will lose if you go to an event and you're not prepared. So you have to be thinking more about, like, whether you're going to be in the right shape, whether you're in the right form. You know, if your players get sick, like, maybe you just don't go to the event because it's not worth. Yeah, it's not worth it. Like, no.
Obviously, look at the major, you would have played anyway. But in theory, if it was a smaller event and Zero's injured and for Vitality, maybe you shouldn't play the event. Maybe you just pull because why lose the points? And by the way, I can even see this is where they
as well.
Yeah, I can even see this is where they probably thought they were doing a good thing, because what did everyone complain about with partner spots? Even coming last, you get points, you attend, and it lets the bad team stay in. So this sounds like it fixes that, but it doesn't. It actually, again, de-incentivizes essentially teams to attend the other tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I will question the points on the partnership thing. At least with, like, for example, like our Blast partnership with the ESL world ranking in mind, we earned 0 points for 2 years, 2.5 years. Because you have to still win games to actually get some points. So, like, people were like, "Oh, Complexity just get all the Blast points to qualify for these events." Like, bro, we literally fucking sucked. Like, we got 0, we got nothing. Like, we would go out of groups, and if you don't get through the groups, you go into the showdown. If you didn't win a game in showdown, you got 0 points, and we did that 3 times. So we got literally nothing. The only time we got through to the finals was because Navi didn't get visas to go to the US. And then that was actually when we also got Elige and we started doing good, and then now we're a bit better now. But yeah, for a long time we got fuck all from that. So, like, it wasn't quite as black and white. But Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot more to take into account next year, I think, when choosing to go to an event. And I saw, who was it? The Sky Esports. Was it BetBoom? BetBoom withdrew from Sky Esports because they weren't happy with the conditions. And I'm like, hey,
yes.
like if I'm in that, like, I mean, this time it was like top 16, right? Top 16 went to the RMR from the European rankings, and if you're in like 14 to 18 region, like, I wouldn't want to risk losing points because my players are sick, or like my PCs are potentially worse than theirs, and we don't have it like confirmed that there's like integrity at the event. Like, it's not worth running that risk. And I think teams will have to take that into account a lot more next year. Maybe not the very, very top teams, and maybe not the very, very lower teams, but certainly the teams who are like, if you look at next year, if they have to invite, if they're doing a 16 team event, you're looking at kind of like top 8 maybe get invited directly to the main event. Yeah.
Here's one people are going to appreciate right now. Think about the current circuit, right? Saw has just made the semi-finals of IEM Cologne. They should actually, in the current circuit, Graham, accept every invite to like the kind of events you're talking about. The smaller ones that they get a top spot in, they might even be able to make like a playoff run there. But actually, in the other system, if they got a lot of points and all these ELO points off all these crazy wins over G2 and fucking FaZe, they should maybe just chill for 2 months. Maybe you don't take that. Maybe you protect that as long as you can. That's actually de-incentivizing us. We all want to see them play again. We want to see them play next week and in 2 weeks, and want to see how good they are and if they can do something. So again, it's an example of where you have to like do the dry run of what can happen if this goes like badly and what would happen to each person, right? Because this feels as though they've owned. Again, I feel like they're just thinking about what FaZe and Vitality are going to do. I don't think they're thinking about people who are lowering the ecosystem.
Yeah, and there is actually a point with what you just said, which is when Valve introduced that 8-week rule, that would be the one that actually makes sense for teams like Saw, because they're going to get this win. And now, that realistically, there's no events to be invited for the next 3 months anyway, because like we just go straight into the major. Rio's already had all the invites done. Like, the rest of this year is basically a wash for any invites, but next year it would make sense. Is that they would get this big win, they'd shoot up the rankings, but then their next invite could not be, well, in Valve's world where they added the 8-week rule, it would be within 2 months, right? So they'd be up in for every event in the next 2 months. Now, Valve need to keep that window. 8 weeks was just too short. That's the problem, because now you can technically do like 4, 5, 6 months. That is too long. Like, that leads into like the ESL Pro League issue, which I know why they have that issue, but like they seeded ESL Pro League that was in May, they seeded it in January. And I mean, we were the number 1 seed in our group, and going into that event, we probably weren't the number 1 seed in our group. We ended up winning the group, so that worked out well, but we probably weren't the number 1. So we had Navi in our group. We weren't the number 1 seed. Like, we're not crazy. So yeah, it would be nice to have a window where teams, where tournament organizers have to send out their invites within like 8 to 12 weeks or something out from the event, like 2 to 3 months. If you're going to have a visa issue, you can skip an event, but then there's going to be another event within that like 4-week period that you can accept another invite for, or something like that, so that teams can sort of pick and choose their events. But yeah, Saw would have been a great beneficiary of that 8-week rule, because they would have instantly got a bunch of invites as soon as they got that big result. And I would love to see the event, but we're probably not, as you're right, because I don't know. I think they might be in the Rio qualifier, actually. Maybe I'm crazy, but they're not going to get invited to it. No, they're not even in the Rio qualifier, and one of the open qualifiers has already happened during Cologne, so they didn't play that. So there's another qualifier starting tomorrow, which they're probably not going to play either. So I don't think we're going to see Saw at Rio, and that's then, yeah, RMR Major. That's their season pretty much. I think they're going to Elisa, actually. I think they just got announced, but yeah, we'll see. There's going to be a lot of shifting around, and people are going to figure out what the optimum system is for sure. But if everyone goes with that system like Blast, it's not going to work.
Compared to what we've just come out of with the partnered league era, though, like I almost welcome the chaos. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, I gotta be honest. Like, yeah, there's gonna be some
chaos
teams.
The ladder, Richard, is it?
It might well be, mate, at this point, because yeah, we saw fucking hell. Workshop that one, mate. We saw what we had. Let's be real. Like, all the partnered league era contributed to was one of the weakest eras in Counter-Strike history. Terrible games, terrible teams being propped up because they had money. Yes, evil geniuses. You know them. You love them. And then it's like, well, where are we going from that, and to what end? Like, what are we even making from that? But to all intents and purposes, by the way, the returns that they were getting for sort of being part of this, they weren't like amazing. They were just sort of enough to justify having a team in the first instance. And if you weren't making sponsorship elsewhere and money elsewhere, this is why so many teams tried to min-max with garbage lineups. And this is why teams also were really unfazed about going to Blast and saying, yeah, we're using a stand-in for the Blast for reasons. A lot of the times it wasn't even visa problems, right? So that was shit. That was shit for fans. It was shit for the purists. It was probably shit for the players. Although, I'll be honest, I think the average player these days is totally fucking phoning in the esports experience. Like, you're not going to see many fucking CS players headbutting a wall, you know, like, because they have to face terrifying fans like they do in League. You're just going to see a bunch of people going, well, the holiday continues. Not a problem. Like, you know, it's fine. But what we need to do is we need to move into an era where there are choices. You don't get to compete at every big tournament. You have to pick one or the other sometimes. And listen, if those orgs want to flex and threaten, I'm sure Valve will come in and bring them a heel and say, you can't do that. We're not going to allow that. That's not going to be something we'll tolerate. But at the end of the day, what we had was teams just competing in the same cycle of tournaments over and over again without any interest, bar one or two highlights in the calendar, like a Katowice or a Cologne. That's shit. Nobody enjoyed that. I don't care what anyone says. Those calendars were boring and bloated.
So, look, from a fan perspective, do you guys think that a lot of these changes are on balance good or bad? Because it seems to me that the purpose of this, in theory, is to streamline the calendar, make sure things are announced. You know what to watch, right? You know which teams hopefully are going to be attending as long as the invites go far enough in advance. So shouldn't this, you know, create a better cadence to the calendar? So you know, the hype events will be really hype under this system, right? And if you have your favorite team, you can follow them, you know, at the maybe some of the tier 1 events they attend that not all the good teams do, or the tier 2 events if they're 9th or lower on the rankings. Like, how do you think this is going to play out as a fan of CS?
As I've watched all 23-4 years of CS, and I don't work currently for any TO, I will say that as a fan, it's brilliant because now all the best events are going to have every single great team there. But here's an obvious question even I would ask. Why the fuck should I be catered to as a fan who pays nothing while fucking Graham's team has to pay fucking a king's ransom to pro players and then not get any of the money back to pay for that and have to get it through sponsors and hustle and go elsewhere and make deals and then have other games that offset you if you get the digital skin items? And fuck that. Why should the fan ever be catered to anymore? The same fan, by the way, who goes, brilliant, you got rid of the partner leagues, they were shit. You know the sort of team who's going to suffer the most? Your beloved teams like Ents, you fucking cretin. That was one of the ways teams like that survived. If they made the major, if they had the partner money, that actually allowed them to sometimes say, we made money this year. We're just a business. We don't have venture capital. We aren't part of that like fucking demonic system in America where it's some race to the bottom of who can get the most VC and hang on to it the longest. So those are the teams. What's funny is Vitality was never going to suffer. Even EG's big enough, they were never going to suffer. They were on the teat of the VC. It's actually teams like an Ents, like the smaller ones, basically, who haven't been in that position. By the way, it's a SAW, etc. All these tiny ones that you all claim to love and support, and all the ones that make the run at a major, that's who is actually going to also suffer on this system. Because I'll tell you another thing, the reverse of that works too, which is when Cole can't go to this medium-sized event and win it or come top 4, and they instead have to go and maybe this time and they're unlucky and they get bounced in the groups at this massive mega event worth $1 million, like a mini major. Well, I'll tell you what, then when SAW and a few of the other teams do go to the smaller event because they're down on the rankings, how can they ever get the ELO? How can they ever get the ELO points? You'd basically, by the way, also have to just murk everyone at that event. If not only would you have to win all the ELO available, but every fucking loss in MR12, what you all asked for with the shittest map pool ever. Then I now also lost points because I went to that event. So now you've de-incentivized me from playing Chex Notes Counter-Strike. So I actually think as a fan, it's brilliant. But I'm also sick and tired of fans. They're the one group of people who shouldn't be catered to in the industry. They pay nothing. They demand everything. And then on top of that, they'll then spit in your face when you give them almost everything. So I'm Richard. Fuck the fans.
No, I mean, listen, I want to be clear. Fuck the fans. I don't know. Listen, the average fan doesn't know what's good or what's bad. They don't care as long as their slop is served up to them every day. All they care about is the firework display being turned on. They sit down and they're going, can I fire up Satan's jukebox today? What's on Satan's jukebox? Well, I don't know why I'm getting all biblical like Duncan here, but like what's on Satan's jukebox? Well, Satan's jukebox has a variety of entertainment. Some of it is movies, good movies. No, we don't watch those. We watch our cape shit. We put it on TV. We've got, there's a new, The Acolyte looks good. We'll fucking watch that. Oh, well, actually, when I'm not doing that, it is in the eyes of the average pleb esports fan. Shall I watch some esports? Well, actually, I don't know if I will because, fucking iShowSpeed is jumping over a car today. So I'm gonna watch that instead of the grand finals of Cologne.
When I told him to play in traffic, I didn't mean literally.
So anyway, that is the average esports fan. They're a moron. And as a result, I agree, they shouldn't be catered to. But let's assume within that, there's an enclave, a holdout of a group of people that actually do care about the game, care about the sport, can talk about it intelligently, capable of watching an analysis desk without muting it. Those people. Well, are they getting a better deal with what the circuit looks like now compared to what the partnered leagues were? And my argument would be yes. I've now experienced both, and let me tell you, because I will not hide behind my prior opinions. I used to love the Wild West. I used to love it. I used to love the open circuit and every man for himself. And I watched many good teams go under, while teams that were given extra lives, if you want, over and over again were allowed to fail and continually bailed themselves out. I watched many good people create orgs and they'd be under in 2 years. Meanwhile, orgs like Fnatic, which have been perennially in the toilet, run by an absolute fucking clown, propped up by clowns, engaged in a bunch of nefarious bullshit just to keep the lights on. Like, I'll just take a secret loan and not disclose it. How dare you report that, Richard Lewis? It's totally fine that G2 has a clause they get to own Fnatic if they default on a secret loan we gave them and we play in the same league. People forget that story. Go look it up. I've watched those orgs perpetually sail, and they sailed into the partner league system. Eventually, I called them out when it was the first ever franchise league they were going to do with Twitch and Vulcan and all those scumbags and the CLG and TSMs, and they were going to do that. And they deliberately planned it when Valve were on holiday. I got them, right? I got them again in the fucking exclusivity league they wanted to start after that. I called out the ESL league. ESL had their own, what was it? The fucking EFC. Yeah, whatever the fuck. I called them out or when they made a league, and guess what? They were partnering with Twitch as well, and they made a fucking league where it was like, yeah, it was essentially an exclusivity league by any other name, but then those teams wouldn't commit because none of these teams are good partners. That's the irony of the partnered league system they fell upon. Were any of them partners? No, they were in Blast and ESL all the time. All of the big leagues, all of the money, all of the time. And what did that serve up to fans? It meant that the Wild West, where you saw teams that were like here today, gone tomorrow, desperately trying to break into the system, they weren't there anymore. And instead, wicked, it's an RVG2 again. And it's a blast one, so they don't even care. So we might get a random result or PSG2 using a stand-in, but enough about Hooksy. So it's like you watch this fucking garbage over and over again for 3 fucking years.
Yeah, keep going though.
I'll do them all, mate. I'll do them all. I don't give a fuck. I'm just rolling right now. I'm rolling right now. Right? So, you know, you watched for like however long it was, 2-3 years, the same team serving up the same slop in the same formats, the same garbage on the same circuits with the same sponsors. Again, sometimes sponsors even across leagues for teams, and then the only occasional bit of spice and interest in this fucking blancmange, this tapioca, this semolina that was being served up to me every single fucking week was you might see an Ents, you might see a Saw, you might see a team you haven't seen before. That rhymed, I'm wicked. So you see that, and you go, oh, that's actually interesting. You might get a genuine bona fide upset. You might see a player you've never seen before. You might see a prospect you've never seen before. Well, the partnered league starved all of that. And now we've got this. Now we've got the Wild West. Now we've got a circuit of difficult choices. It might suck for people like Graham. I'm sure he's about to tell us why it does. But the reality remains for the fan, I might see games that are high stakes, that matter, the type of which I might not see for months on end, maybe not even in the entire half of a circuit. We might get one-off games again. Remember the joy of a one-off game when you were on some League of Legends world shit, when you would see like, holy fuck, they hardly ever play each other. They've somehow dodged each other in all of these great
that
circuits.
sucks, to be clear.
Well, listen, compared to seeing, imagine if you saw Genji T1 every week. Mate, it's trash. It's like being married for 30 years. You just roll over onto the side of the bed and I'll read a book tonight, darling. Right? That's what's going on, right? So no, what we've got here at least is exciting and wild and chaotic. It's got thorny edges that we need to negotiate, and some teams are going to suffer, and some teams are going to take stands, and some teams are going to win, and some teams are going to lose. And yes, the haves and the have-nots are still going to be very distinct, but Valve are at least watching that aspect of it. And I think, like, actually, for the fans, it's better that we're closer to the Wild West than the partner leagues. The partner leagues stuck the life and soul out of competitive Counter-Strike. And look, me and Duncan differ on this. I'm for MR12 because of where the meta was at the end. The last year of CSGO was excruciating. I hated it. I hated watching the game. Every time I sat down to watch it, I didn't feel like I was being served up with delicious smorgasbord of MR15 tactical 5-dimensional Jenga. I didn't feel like I was getting that. Here's what I thought I got. The same drawn-out shit over and over again, except where a map used to take 30 minutes, it now takes 80. That did not behoove my desires or my wants. It made tournaments fucking suck. 4 timeouts, 15 rounds, never-ending fucking rounds, a meta, an economy that's fundamentally broken, teams that have given up and only try in select tournaments and then phone it in the rest of the time. Visa problems, endless stand-ins. That last year was AIDS. It was absolute shit. I don't even want to recall it. It was just a joke. It was a different team winning every week because nobody could be asked. Now, this might give us a different team winning every week, but it'll give us a different team winning every week because some teams aren't there, because some teams are sat at home holding on to their points, and some teams didn't want to go to that tournament because fuck blast, the financial incentive isn't there.
I'm going to point out,
wicked.
Richard, this actually makes content surrounding and being a fan of Counter-Strike, what you're saying, much more interesting, because if you're a hardcore fan and you like discussion, there's going to be a lot more to talk about if some of the teams aren't at some of these events, because you're like, oh, this team won. Does that mean they're actually good? And, it's going to make the analysis and like the takes pretty juicy. In my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a minor point because, again, what I've come to realize is this is a terrible thing to admit on a podcast network, but fans don't even really give a fuck. You are talking to a tiny amount of esports fans, unfortunately, with podcasts or anything. Put it this way, ESL again. They've done some good content at this event. You got to hand it to them. They had a round table with a bunch of top IGLs. That should be straight fire for anyone who cares about the game. People barely watch that. People barely watch that. I could make a clip of, like, I don't know, fucking football, man hitting groin with football, and that's millions of hits.
I mean, the joke is, if Simple just tells me to fuck off again, that's more than any piece of content or profile ever created, unironically.
Yes, yeah, unironically. So, look, where we're at, we had totally stagnated as a product. We were even entering a world where people were starting to believe Valorant was better than CS. People were starting to think that had the future, not us. That's how dark it got. And now, with this brand new circuit, I honestly think it's time. It's time to make choices. Why should teams be allowed to have it all? Why should orgs be allowed to have it all? Why should you be allowed to be in ESL, PGL, Face It, fucking ESEA, Starlight? Why should you get to compete in everything? That's not how the world works. That's not how it works. That's not how any sport works. I don't just get to say, listen, I'm in the NFL, but I'm just going to fuck off and play in the fucking Canadian equivalent as well to make some extra money. They go, no, your commitment's here. You make your money here. You do your sponsorship obligations here. Yeah, but I can double dip, right? And well, no, that sucks. That sucks for all of us, your partners, your fans, all these other people. It's great for them in that league, but let them make their teams. Let them make franchises and brands that stand out. And they don't, and we don't. Like, nobody takes a fucking risk. You saw it. You did Flashpoint. You know what that was like. Who wants to commit and come into this glorious league, a new league where everyone's going to make more money?
As much as I like to take the side of the orgs, because I sometimes feel like their voice never gets spoken, and people, including players who play for them, think they're the person who's the Victorian factory girl matchstick person who's being exploited, while they literally walk away with 6 figures to $1 million, while the org loses millions of dollars to run their team. As much as I like to stand from that way, there's another example, Richard, of how just give us a voice, give us some power, let us have a say. All right, we'll just make a whole league based around all that. You all in? Yeah. And you'll all get good lineups. So yeah. Don't worry about that. Oh, sorry, actually, we're just not going to get teams. So did you like commit to this and make draw battle lines and draw on one side? Well, fuck yeah, I guess we're just going back to ESL now anyway. See ya. Even Cloud9 at the end. Can we come back to Pro League? Fuck you. Fuck you. By the way, I'll just say this, Cloud9. Can you let me know how much is my Flashpoint stock worth now? Like, can I do anything with that? Just a piece of paper. Oh, cool. Brilliant. Good job you paid me that as my bonus for working double the amount of games at a Flashpoint rather than money, because I was called selfish for suggesting I should get a bonus for working a bunch of games for people who didn't turn up to the event. Oh, it's weird how that works. So actually, you know what? Fuck the teams too. Fuck all of Counter-Strike.
There it is.
I'm playing 1.6 again. I'm back.
I've saved him. I splashed holy water on his face. Right, Grim, you haven't spoke for a while, so let's get you in. I mean, obviously, as
obviously not
a
fuck your
GM,
team, Grim. You're okay.
No. We love complexity, and we love complexity. We love Elise. We love all those guys. So, obviously, as a general manager, you may have a different perspective. I imagine there are going to be some challenges in the 2025 circuit that people like me and Duncan get to be flippant about, but actually, it's a real concern for you.
Yeah, I mean, like, the main concern is the fear of the unknown at the moment. We don't know how it's going to play out, so it's very hard to make accurate, budget predictions, everything else like that. Like, obviously, the financial hit to the partner teams who are losing their partnership status will be a significant thing for the however many of us there are. But I don't really consider that a factor into what we're planning for next year. I think, if you ask me, like, I agree with you, actually. I think it's going to be good that there's going to be loads more events going on. I think it's going to be good that there's different tournament organizers coming back into the space. I think burnout is a real concern. I think that there's going to be a huge... I think the biggest concern I have is that the tier 2 teams who don't know what it's like to travel every fucking week, every week and a half, are going to try and farm as many events as they can. And them doing that is going to force the teams just above them. So let's say that's us, for example, in that kind of weird, like, kind of 9 to 14 range, where it's like you could drop out of the top 16, you could make it into the top 8, you're kind of in that weird kind of invite range. that's going to make us need to play events, because if we're not playing events, we're not earning points. And then if we're then earning points, then the teams above us have to earn more points. And it's like what we saw recently in the player break. Like a bunch of teams just farmed the fuck out of the player break. They played so many events, they farmed so many points, and the player breaks are not official anymore. The CSPPA is fucking dead. They killed themselves, right? So the CSPPA is gone. There is no official player break. Like anyone who asks, like, when is the player break? There fucking isn't one. The player break is literally, hey, the TOs have sort of agreed that these 4 weeks are not going to have any events in them, but they could fuck that any time because there is no player break. And Valve, as far as I'm aware, don't want to get involved. It's not their thing.
Nope.
There's no one advocating for the players. So I spoke to my players and I was like, hey, like, do you guys have any thoughts on this? And they're like, nah, it doesn't affect us. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't affect you now, but give it 2 or 3 player breaks when everyone's farming these events, and it might affect you eventually.
You've just gotten to the bottom there of why the CSPPA didn't work, but keep going.
Essentially, yes. And I don't want to throw my players under the bus because they're by far not the worst in this situation. But
no,
I asked them their opinion, and I said, like, hey, what do you think about this? And that was basically their response. And when I sort of spoke to them and explained the ramifications, they were like, oh, actually, yeah, this could be a fucked up thing. But yeah, it's like, 2 or 3 player breaks down the line, so it's the end of 2025 or whatever. But yeah, I think burnout is going to be my biggest concern going into next year, because teams are not going to know the correct cadence of events. If you lose an event, all of a sudden you're like, shit, I need to get the points back, accept every invite. There's going to be a lot of figuring out the system, and I think next year is going to be a shit show in that regard. But right. I know there are a lot of teams who are going to try and play it not safe, but try and play it as best they can, and cherry pick and choose the events that they can go to and that they know that they can compete well at. And those teams are typically the ones that you would say are at the top of the rankings. The ones that generally when they go to an event, they know they're going to have a pretty good event and it's not going to cost them negatively, at least. But the teams that can't guarantee performance are going to be in a weird position where they feel like they have to attend every single event because they don't know when the next event's going to come. And I think that's going to cause a sort of waterfall effect where everyone's just going to accept every single invite they can.
Do you think that the way that the rankings are calculated need to change in order to limit this? Is this something that you have a fix for in any way?
So the rankings themselves that Valve have are not that inaccurate. There's a few weird 1 or 2 teams where they're obscurely like 10 positions higher than they should be, and that needs to get fixed.
It does feel like a power ranking to a degree with
a little bit. And I think teams can move up and down a bit too quickly in that regard. But overall, like, if you look at the rankings, you don't sit there and be like, wow, this is completely wrong. It's not inaccurate in a sense like that. There is definitely ways to abuse the rankings, and Valve had an idea where they sort of said, like, oh, the initial seed that you get is calculated off your best 10 results, which is kind of like a farming stop. The problem is that after that, you just get head-to-head elo, and you can just keep building and building and building. So the more matches you play, the more elo you can earn, as long as you're winning, right? So obviously, if you go on a huge loss streak, you're going to fuck yourself. But yeah, there is no grind protection, essentially. So if you keep winning, you're going to keep earning points. And
right, there isn't like throwing out the weird outliers if you play more.
No. After a certain point, it's just head-to-head results will just keep adding to your tally. So you can just keep earning. I think it's called Glico technically, but it's essentially an elo system. So the teams that want to play a lot can technically earn a lot of points. The thing is, the teams that want to play a lot right now, at least, are sort of like the tier 2 European teams, and because they're playing teams that are the similar rank to them, they're not earning enough points to make it valuable. They're not playing on LAN, which is significantly valuable in the current system, which I think Johnny Speed's, the Swedish team, they sort of not abused it because it's not their fault, but any LAN win was basically worth like 50 points or something. So they went to like a local Swedish elite, like the local Swedish regional championships, and they won like four games, and they just boom, straight up the rankings. And that could be abused by any local regional event, except for the fact that local regional events are going to struggle to get a tournament license, most likely anyway, because we can go back to the rankings, but like the way the rules work right now is you can't subdivide. If you want to run a tier 1 event, you can't subdivide by region. You can only invite via Valve's officially released rankings, which only come in 3 regions and global. So you can't run a Swedish championship with the top Swedish teams because you can't invite only Swedish teams. But then if you want to run a tier 2 event where you can subdivide into nationality, you can only invite from the 9th best ranked team available. So the regional CS is fucking dead under the current rules. Like there's no such thing as regional Counter-Strike. There's no such thing as country-based Counter-Strike. So yeah, like, you know, if you're a Brazilian organizer, like there was 2 events recently in South America. There was Fire League and Get Rio, where they invited predominantly South American Brazilian teams and like 1 or 2 European teams. They can't do that anymore because they'd have to invite North American teams. Because you can only invite, if you want to run a tier 1 event and you want to do it on the Americas ranking, you'd have to invite North American teams like us, Liquid, and M80 before you get to some of the Brazilian teams. So Brazilian teams can't even run a tier 1 level Brazilian event anymore for their own region because the ranking doesn't exist, which is like, just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, it's good for us, but we're the kind of minor region now. But there's a lot of issues right now with how these events are going to shake up. I think the tier 1 level is going to be fine. I think tier 1 global events, they'll just keep on running and teams will pick and choose which events they'll go to. And after 6 or 8 months, we'll figure out which events make sense, what circuits make sense, how the schedule all works out. I think that will be fine. I think there will be an element of burnout as teams will overplay next year just to secure themselves until they figure it out. But my biggest concern right now is actually tier 2. I think tier 2 is in a really weird state because getting these licenses 3 months in advance and not being able to like run regional level events in certain regions of the world will be extremely tough. I hope Valve will figure out a way to fix this because right now it just looks painful as hell. But yeah, overall, generally actually very positive. But again, coming from my perspective, where I'm in that tier 1 bucket where I'm probably going to get invited, you know, if they have to invite minimum 16 teams, we've not been under 16 for a year, I think now. So like for us, that's pretty good. We're quite happy with that. And in the worst case, because they have to invite 1.5 times the amount of teams, it's top 24, and then we go into a close qualifier, like we're still going to be involved. We're still going to be in the mix. So for us, like, you know, coming from a place of privilege, essentially, because we are still technically running off the partnership league. So, you know, we do have those guaranteed invites. You know, I'm not going to gloss over that. So like we do still have like a safety net. But we've still performed well enough within Valve's own ranking that we're still winning matches against teams that are earning us points to secure those rankings. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting next year, and I think a lot of teams are very unsure of what they're going to do and still lacking a lot of information from PGL and StarLadder, especially around their circuits and especially around rev share opportunities, things like that, is going to throw a few things in the mix. And ESL also haven't announced their rev share, if they're going to have one, whether they're going to have one, and how much is going to be in it and how it's going to be distributed. We don't know anything about that.
Well, it's
the only
crazy
one that's
about
got all
that
their
is
cards on
like,
the table is Blast.
Yeah, I mean, they may not. I mean, they're in a position where maybe they don't even have to rev share because who's going to turn down Katowice and Cologne, right?
Technically, yes, and that's kind of what I alluded to earlier. When Valve first sent this thing, I think Blast and ESL were like, "Fuck yeah!" Like, holy shit, we're out of all our partnerships, so we don't have to pay all this money, and teams were still going to play our events. That's great. And then they realized, oh shit, PGL are coming back in force. StarLadder are going to come back in. Who else is going to come back in? So I think it's the other tournament organizers that are going to keep the other tournament organizers honest. Now, obviously, you could ask the question of, are they going to be able to take down an ESL backed by the Saudi Arabian state? That's another question, but there is at least competition, right? So it's there.
I was just going to throw this in as well. One of the other good things it's done, because look, I was around when ES Force tried their bullshit, and this is no different. But you know, when you see something like a Bet Boom, is it Dacha or Dacha or whatever? Yeah, I can't pronounce it. When you see that, right, and Bet Boom is invited, the Bet Boom CS team, right, one of the biggest problems was always going to be if that generates ranking points, they choose which teams go. They can just go, we're going to invite Bet Boom and a bunch of shitters down here. Bloody hell, Bet Boom have won it again. Well, they can't do that now. They can't do that. If they want, even if they want to run a tier 2 tournament, they're precluded from doing that because
it would have to be unranked. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It has to be unranked, and not only that, they have to cap the prize money as well. So you can't even circle sponsorship money into your team, back to you, and round it goes in some sort of, which I'm sure they would never do in that region. But the reality is, again, I understand. Will it create a potentially bigger disparity for the haves and the have-nots? That for me remains to be seen. Graham's right. Having the gap, being top 16 in the Valve ranking is pretty much everything right now. If you're 16 and you get guaranteed to be at least having the opportunity to turn down the right to attend, it's all in your hands. But you're only going to get that through sustained achievement. And I kind of feel that's better than what we had with the partnership leagues, which was, like say, the Blast circuit would do this thing where it would be like, here's a tournament where, it's a showdown or whatever the fuck, and you compete in it, and you would win it, and you would go to one event once, maybe lose, and then you were just never back in their circuit ever again. You couldn't earn enough points to sustain being invited because of how they weighted the points for the partnered teams. And ESL took a lot of criticism, rightly so, for the Louvre agreement stuff, but the Blast circuit was just as prohibitive, if not more so, actually. At least in Pro League, they expanded it out to 32, and you would just see, Looking for Org is playing in an ESL Pro League event. So, now you're not going to see that, and we get back to this point, which is the Valve rankings have got to be so on point. The Valve ranking is now potentially the most important piece of data in the scene. It's always been done by HLTV ranking. Teams used to link to their HLTV page to prove their legitimacy. And HLTV world ranking was considered the de facto world ranking. The MVP of a tournament isn't who ESL says it is, it's who HLTV says it is. So now it's all Valve. And I've seen shit where Valve put Mongols in the top 10. Yeah, I know they beat Spirit recently, but they
have the Sky Esports bullshit as well. They also farmed that.
Yeah, exactly. And you go, no, that's not true. In no conceivable world are they actually a top 10 team. And yet, with the Valve ranking, they're gonna get that. And that's a problem. Valve have really got to dial in. I don't know what they do algorithmically or mathematically, but the Valve ranking now has to be unimpeachable as a piece of information because it is going to dictate the entire landscape of the World Championships and, by extension, the entire fortunes of the teams that are deemed to be within that top 16. I mean,
particularly
also,
with the importance of major sticker money to team revenue as well.
Yes, I mean, completely. It's life-changing. It remains life-changing. I don't want to use the phrase life-changing money like I've been bought and paid for by Saudi Arabia, but it is life-changing money. Sticker money is huge. It's not just life-changing money. You are obviously in the game historically forever, but the reason those players are crying when they qualify for a major, I don't want to break the magic for anyone. They're not crying because they're going to get to compete in a world championship. They're crying because they've just made about $300,000 in one go that will be theirs. And so it is super important. And the problem we've got right now with the way the world ranking works is it is broken. I can see that. And it's not a secret that RMRs, as we know them, are going to go. So this ranking is going to be everything. And it worries me because Valve have these moments of oversight, we can get a visa in 8 weeks. Sorry, Gabe, have you heard about the ongoing situation with Ukraine and Russia? Oh, yeah, my bad. Let's walk that one back then, yeah. But surely our world ranking is fine. This Mongols team look to be doing very well. Let's send them to the World Finals. Guys, this has to be right. And there's, I go back and forth with whether or not it's worth talking to Valve sometimes. They're always super nice and personable when you talk to them. They've always been super kind to me. They always seem to at least listen to what I say. They never implement any of it until it's too late, of course, which is the other aspect to it. But it's like this world ranking, there's no room for fucking around on this. Like, you can fuck around on the circuit and fuck around on the points and fuck around on, JL doesn't get a fucking trophy in the game for 5 months at a time. No one really cares about any of that. That won't have any seismic impact. If your world ranking is broken, your tournaments will be broken. Your circuit will be broken. Your world championships will be broken. And by extension, the winners will be broken. The scene will become meaningless. And so I am terrified. I am mortally afraid that they keep the algorithm they've got now, which, as Graham has pointed out, as I've observed, as everyone's observed, one team has one run, cheeses one tournament with a $1 million prize pool, and suddenly we have to pretend that they're a top 10, top 8 team when they ain't. And that's a problem when the majors coming around. So Valve need to fix that first and foremost. That's where I don't care if you talk to us. Don't care if you tell us about the patches. Don't care about anything like that. Just fix your world ranking. Just make it work. Make it so we all know it's right. Because a world ranking's right when you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I could speak to a little bit of this because we as a royal there was a group of teams or team representatives from both Louvre and non-Louvre teams. The meeting was initially facilitated by the Louvre agreement, but it was a meeting with teams from inside and outside of that group. And we sat down with them in Copenhagen and went through a lot of these things with them regarding the ranking specifically, because we had very deep concerns about a lot of it. Some of it's been rectified a little bit. Certainly, one of the main things we said was like, you need to have like a way of viewing the ranking that isn't like being like 200 IQ. So I think that straight after that meeting, the first thing that we saw was like they got these like details pages where you could see how the teams earned their points, things like that. That was like the first thing they did, and they've made some like minor changes to the model since then. But we're still very much in active feedback mode on trying to like supply them with what we believe are the issues with it. We're not trying to tell them like this is how you need to build the model and everything, because they'll never listen to things like that. But we're trying to sort of say like, hey, a team like the Mongols shouldn't be able to go to Yala Campus, win $200,000, and then suddenly be ranked 7th in the world. Like that doesn't really make sense. I respect the Mongols; they're doing a great job. They're having some good results, but they weren't ever the 7th best team in the world. So there's a and if one, for that one. if one team has like a small event, like it's fine if they could jump up to 7th like 1 week, whatever. But like if that goes to the invite to like like the majors next year or whatever it is, then that could have pretty big ramifications. So there is like some tweaking that needs to be done, and I know Valve are very cautious about making tweaks to things while the partner leagues still exist, because you don't know what the effect of those leagues is on the rankings and everything else. But there's definitely some issues in there. I think that one of the things they added was, we said that like, oh, we need LAN to be more valuable, so they added in this LAN factor, which is great, except for the fact that a BO1 win at Swedish Esports Championship is worth the same as a best of 5 win in the final of Cologne. Equally, 1-to-1, they are worth exactly the same amount of value to that ranking. So yes, it's great that they've added it in, but we need to have some context to it. It needs to be tied to the event weighting in some way, except the event weighting is still tied entirely to prize money. So there's still some issues.
Even another factor there, which is an obvious example, since Na'Vi just won it, is people want to go, hey, this is like part of their dynasty. It was a tournament that had like, we almost have as many people in this chat as the crowd. You know what I mean? Like that has to be a factor too. Like it's different to win Cologne than it is to win Esports World Cup. It just is.
I thought the fans didn't matter, Duncan. So how can you bring this to ranking?
Here's why. Fans that pay do matter. That's the problem.
You think they paid?
He's done it.
The people, no, not Esports World Cup.
Alone.
Esports World Cup.
No, they can sell 16,000 tickets for Cologne. I know you're making a joke, but that's the fan I do care about. You know what? Even if there's some only pixel fan dickhead, the fan who pays for the pass for all of Cologne and goes and gets all that shit German beer and goes like, oh, as a Vuvuzela or something, I don't fucking know, then reaches under for like a Vodafone, like, oh, I've got a light here, like the first man who invented fire, Quest for Fire reference. That fan I actually care about, believe it or not. The one who's just on the internet, like, give me it all for free. That guy can go fuck off, you know. But anyway, you make a valid point.
Fair enough. I've forgotten where I fucking was, so oh well.
It was about the points being equivalent, and we have to wait.
Yeah, that was
points,
it. Yeah,
points
yeah.
for different lands.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, any win on land, be a 1, doesn't matter, is worth the same as a best of 5 in the grand final of any event, and that's clearly an issue because it shouldn't be that way. The fact that they've added the land factor in is good, but yeah, it need like. With a lot of the things with the ranking, it just needs a little bit of tweaking so it makes more sense in the context of the event that you attended, and the events that you attend also need to have a better or more suitable like weighting towards how valuable they are to the ranking. Because yeah, like a $1 million Cologne event, which is clearly a legacy event, probably top 3 event of the year, right behind the majors, I would say. You know, I've worked at the events, I've been to the events. Cologne is a fantastic event. Changed things for me, at least. Like, that was the first event I went to in 2015 where I was like, fuck me, we've just filled an entire arena. Like, this is insane. So Cologne is a great event, and it just should be worth more, regardless of the prize money or you know, the amount, whatever. There are certain things that just don't fit into the ranking, and I understand that Valve want to keep it.
They need a vibes multiplier.
Vibes. Yeah, I mean, we're never going to get that. Like, there just has to be a certain way of making sure that different aspects of their ranking are tied more heavily to how significant an event is that isn't just prize money. And Cologne is $1 million, so it technically already maxes the cap out because the cap is already $1 million, so it already has that. But that means that any event that is $1 million or close to $1 million has the same weighting, and that doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, technically it is the same, but the only thing that counteracts that is that if it doesn't have the best teams in the world, you can't win the ELO from the best team, so it won't be worth as much overall, except for that land factor, which is not tied to that aspect. Yeah. So yeah, they just need to fix the land factor aspect of it, and that will fix some of the problems. But yeah, as you said, Richard, like, the ranking next year is going to be everything, and every team is going to be sitting there clicking updating every Monday or whenever Valve decides to do an update and be like, what the hell just happened? Where am I? You know, what's going to
I'm already poised for the whining. I mean, that's the
it's
thing.
happening already.
Yeah, exactly. I'm already poised for like some insane levels of whining.
That's
like,
okay, Richard. You're going to make great content that everyone's going to watch about the whining. So you're the real winner.
Well, yeah, I don't know though, because the problem with it is going to get real old real fucking fast, and this is why I want Valve to create a ranking that's unimpeachable. Like, you see people criticize HLTV rankings, but nobody really comes along for the ride. Like, a couple of teams have gone, I don't know if we're really 5th. I think we should be 4th. And everyone goes, whatever. It's HLTV, right? It's a ranking that's as old as time. Is it flawless? No, I mean, very often. Duncan, by the way, he used to have his own ranking. I myself, when I was the editor at Cadred, we did our ranking for Source. We were the official ranking for Counter-Strike Source, which no one cared about. But still, we did it, and we were the official hub for it. And what we used to do, we had a board of 12 people, of which I was one, and we would all vote who we thought was, like, 1 to 10. And if you were 1, you got 10 points. And if you were 10th, you got 1 point. We would tally everyone up, add it up. This was the scientific way we did it. And then we would basically say, this is 1, this is 2. And we would list it. And that ranking, teams lived and died by it. It got you sponsors. It got you invited to events. When teams dropped out of the top 10 ranking in Cadred, if they felt they were like 11th or 12th and they had a case and maybe bias had kept them out, it's all I fucking heard about, mate. It's all I heard about. Like, players would fucking collar me at LAN. I'd be trying to do work and they'd come over all fucking beery-eyed. Why be 11th, mate? Why be 11th, mate? Oh, we're doing this again. No, for fuck's sake. That was my life for about 8 years or whatever the fuck it was, So I understand how important rankings can be to teams and how it can be to players, especially when it dictates opportunity. And we've gone along with HLTVs for a long time because, for good or ill, it's worked out to be the best, but not flawless. You can still argue with it here and there. what Valve's has to be, it has to be the most robust ranking we've ever seen, because it is going to be tied to their entire circuit in a way no ranking ever has been before. This is
I think a great example of
this is
that.
to keep up.
A great example of that was the most recent major, because they changed the system for how teams are allocated to the different capsules in the major, and it's now based off the world ranking. And they did a world ranking like 5 minutes after we played the final game of the Americas RMR, where we beat Liquid, we qualified. Just want to remind everyone of that. It was great. And we ended up being the #1 team in the Americas. We overtook Furia by like 4 points. Furia went 3-0 in the RMR. We went 3-1. We lost to them directly, but we somehow earned enough points. We were second to begin with. We earned enough points. We overtook them during the RMR, and we ended up the #1 team. So we took the only Legends slot from the Americas.
Correct. Yeah.
That was, I mean, I don't give numbers, but that's several hundred thousands of dollars of difference that got made for that one single. Like, I think it was like 4 or 5 points in the end was the difference between the two of us. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, like clean, just no question.
And it might have accidentally worked out right, but it wasn't.
It might have been.
You know what I mean?
We may well have been the best team then. Yeah, but
yeah,
we lost to them and had a worse record. So it was very hard to justify. But that's what the ranking said. And like, if that had been last year, that would have been millions of dollars.
Right.
If that was the Paris major, that would have been millions. Would have been the difference between those two teams, those two rankings. So yeah, it wasn't as impactful. It could be more impactful in China, but like, anyway, and it could be even more impactful, as you say, if they do want to remove the RMRs going into probably not Austin next year, but probably the one after that. I think
I can only imagine that the purpose of this entire system is to remove the RMRs.
Yeah,
I would hope so. Because I don't see where the RMRs fit in the schedule. Where do they go?
Yeah. Well, exactly.
They also are inappropriate. Like, imagine if right before Wimbledon, all Djokovic had to play a qualifier, and if he loses to a rando, it just doesn't get to play in Wimbledon. That would be what the majors were. Remember, Australis didn't make it. Like, FaZe had one last year, where they almost then the Blast Press one. They made it through that last chance qualifier. I actually think RMRs were fundamentally bad. I understand if you're a tiny org, you love them. I get that, but I'm an elitist.
Yes. Now that you've reminded me, though, that the RMRs did deprive Astralis,
See, that's your problem. Is they're going, look, they fucked them over, Richard, but it was Furia that were the main victims. Yeah, they fucked them, all the big teams over, but it was Astralis, Richard. You're like, let them fight.
I mean, I don't think anyone's a victim if they still qualify for the major, just to be clear. But certainly the financial implications of the ranking can already be felt. And if they choose to make that more drastic by making it the qualification process rather than the seeding process, then they, as Richard said, they need to be shit fucking hot. Like, they need to be perfect. Like, because like,
and I just don't know what frame of reference Valve would have to make a shit hot world ranking. Like, that's the worrying thing. Like, I know they're doing it like mathematically or some shit, and they're pulling all. You've never done this before, guys. Like, you really haven't. I understand why you wouldn't outsource it to HLTV, or even worse, if we're just being honest about it, like outsource it to an individual. Like, I get that, right? But like, you've never done any of this. I mean, like, I've always got the vague impression sometimes talking just some of the Valve guys, like, I don't think they at any given moment in time they know who like the best team in the world is. Like, I don't think they do. And I'm not saying they're going to be directly responsible for it, but they might be the ones creating the algorithm. We've already seen how they might weight some things like absurdly, equal to things that we all know to be more important and have more value. So it does worry me. It worries me immensely. Valve, they really are entering into uncharted territory, and they are doing it without the apparatus needed to navigate these waters. And that is that, they don't have a community manager. They don't have anyone who's public facing, who's going to communicate any of this stuff.
But that doesn't really fold into Valve's hiring practices, right? Where they don't really hire people for specific
Neither
roles,
is having a world ranking.
They literally did it in Dota.
That's fair.
Also true. Yeah.
There's a precedent, I would say.
I mean, they did it in Dota, and then it sort of fell by the wayside, and they stopped doing it. And they got a little bit pissy about the way the Dota scene is, and ended up withdrawing their entire circuit. So let's not hope it's a precursor of things to come. Like I have to believe everything I know about Valve. If there's one thing I have to believe about Valve, they will learn from their mistakes. They're not Riot. They don't just keep fucking up over and over again, fixing it 5 years after the fact by doing the thing the community told them to do in the first place, and then going, hey guys, glorious new idea we just came up with, and hope that none of the people who recommended it are still around.
Richard,
Valve
I don't know if you saw this, but their new idea is that people should subscribe on Twitch.
I nearly threw up. They rolled out that guy. What's it called? You're the best, Zimmerman, or whatever his name is. Yeah. And they rolled him out, and he literally said, "Great new idea for you guys. If you subscribe to a Riot official channel, you will give you like emotes for it and stuff, like any other channel." I'm like, is there more Marky Mark?
My favorite one was ad-free, even though Riot literally only presses the Twitch ad button during those 3-minute breaks where they just have a screen up that has the countdown on it. Like you never miss content because of ads anyway.
But by the way, again, rewind when they first started, and people used to say to them, "Why don't you just get subs on that shit? Just do like some partnered stuff and get subs now while you're on the come up."
I'll do better, Richard. In 2013, when I was casting OGN, if you wanted to watch the English stream for the Korean League,
right,
of HD, so you could watch it for free at 480.
Oh,
in
yeah,
2013.
Yeah.
But if you wanted,
you're talking about like the GOM studio.
Yeah. So basically, OGN was doing that, but only for the English stream. Let me be clear. Now, that we had $1 million a year in revenue from Twitch subs. I think probably OGN, they had 25,000 Twitch subs at the time. I think they were probably one of, if not the very most subscribed channel at Twitch in 2013. And you can only imagine had they continued that program, because now the viewership is significantly larger, especially for Korean League of Legends in English, if they had continued that program. So basically, in the last decade, they've probably, no joke, left like, I don't know, 15 to $30 million on the table.
Yeah. I actually calculated this the other day for a show, the same thing, because here's the other thing. That was OGN, which was a specialist thing. You had to be into Korean League of Legends, oftentimes be wanting to watch random games as well, and have English language, right? If that had been the LCS back then, oh my God, they could have had they could have had 200k subs, mate. That would have been real. And if you'd have had that kind of number, by the way, spoiler, like Richard implies, you'd be such an enormous streamer. You're not even getting the 250. You might even get all of it from Twitch.
You get at least 350.
You might even get all of it, because at that point you're bringing the viewership to their thing. You can even then do a play of like, I go to this other person. You might have actually, for real, that's real. 15 to 30 million might be real. And by the way, remember that thing about the LCS economy. The 30 million, by the way, would go a long way to making up the gap in those salaries and all the people not making revenue. So no, this is another example of like, this is the sort of thing people miss in esports. It's like this is the worst thing about the big companies and the game devs. They actively turn money away from the scene. It's not that it's some suspicious thing or some shady thing. They just go, I don't think you should make any money off that because I'm cool not making any. And you go, what the fuck is this? The mafia? When it is. That's the problem. That's how it operates.
All right. I don't want to get derailed into Riot. It was just a funny sidebar from news this week.
But yeah, I mean, just coming back to Valve, like, again, I mean, it is a good example. It is salient in the sense that Valve aren't going to make those type of mistakes. I don't believe that. I have worked with many games developers, and I have seen them all. I have seen the cultishness of Riot. I have seen the blinkered greed of Kotick era Activision Blizzard. I've even dealt with the like bizarrely insecure Psionics and Epic Games to a lesser extent when my company did a Fortnite event. Valve are the best, hands down. They're the best of a bad bunch. They're the best. They do fucking seem to be their only problem is they just view everything as a puzzle that only they can solve. They'll never take a pre-written solution. You know what I mean? Like if you say to them, "This is the answer, my dudes," they go, It's a bit base, that answer, though, isn't it? And I think if we do this fucking quadratic equation, we can come with a better answer than that. And that's how they roll. But they do have a tendency, I think, to understand when something is so catastrophic, they roll it back. And I think they have a tendency to understand if something's not working and it is absolutely crucial it does, they prioritize fixing it. And that I can work with. And as I said, I think Valve have been very generous and very forgiving in they allowed their partners to turn Counter-Strike, competitive Counter-Strike, into some fucking Sodom and Gomorrah version of esports, where only the wealthy and decadent and depraved get to have any fucking fun and do fucking anything. Meanwhile, if you're an upcoming esports org, go fuck yourself. There isn't even a circuit for you to play anymore, because this enclave of people have bought it all and they own it all, and there's no way in until you can put 3 million in the fucking bank. And Valve have been generous. Even they could have come out and struck it all down and fucking fire and brimstone that shit. They didn't do that neither. They said, listen, when do your contracts expire? 2025. That's when we're starting afresh. We're going to do it properly. We're going to go back to the open circuit, the thing we like. And I think, in general, by and large, these changes are going to be very positive for the space. Not everyone's going to feel the benefit. There's a couple of things they have to absolutely get right. But if they get that right, we're going to look back on however long it was, the 3 years of the partnered league system, and we're going to think, why the fuck did we ever do that? Why did we ever allow that to happen as a community? Like, how did we all get tricked? We were like programmed. Oh, exclusivity's bad. Oh, no. This isn't exclusive. They're just partners. Exclusive partners. Partners. And we all got fucking sucked into it. And we just let it happen, and we just let CS get ruined. We're coming out of it now. Like 2025 for me is like, it's a reawakening. You know, I don't mind saying it. I got really jaded with competitive Counter-Strike. Find myself gravitating towards smaller esports. Find myself interested in, like, you know, Farm Simulator and stuff like that over Counter-Strike.
Play Evanescence, bring me back to life.mp3.
Indeed. Wake me up inside, Duncan.
All right. Any other final thoughts?
Let Graham have the last word. So I'll do my final thoughts. My final thoughts are just what I said. I think, look, there were a lot of problems. We fixed a lot of the problems. All Valve have to get right is the world ranking. And please, if you watch this, Valve, and I will make this recommendation at the event I may be at the future, right? You have to get a community manager. You can't live without a community manager anymore. Like, I get it. You've always been that super cool company that's like, oh, we're a flat company with no managers except Gabe, but don't mention that. And we pull resources from all these projects and we do all this. We love you for that. You're going to be studied for decades for that. Yeah, sometimes you make bad games. Sometimes you don't finish games we all really want. It's great, though. It's interesting. But every single esports manufacturer, every single games developer, they have a wretched, servile individual like the mouth of Sauron who has to come out and communicate what the fuck you're doing to the community and get bombarded with shit for it, but at least the community can't say they're kept in the dark about it. And unfortunately, if you want to run a successful esport, there has to be somebody like that. I'm not talking like you have to be like fucking Riot, for fuck's sake, where Mark Merrill or John Needham and Mark Zimmerman, all these people, they can't fucking wait to get in front of a camera. They're never not in front of a camera. They're telling you what they had for fucking breakfast every day. I don't give a fuck about that. But sometimes there are some important things that need to be communicated in your hilarious patch notes or absence of, or random updates or sudden blog posts that is so anachronistic to where we are in the games development industry. It's not even quaint or kitsch anymore. You have to get into the here and now. And if you want to run a successful esport, there has to be a public-facing person that carries the can. You can call them a community manager, you can call them a commissioner. If you don't have one of them, your esport is going to struggle. You must hire one. I don't care who it is. I'd recommend Sponge, not even being sarcastic. He's the man for the job, in my opinion. Yes, it might come with some issues, but, there's no one I can think of off the top of my head who would be better suited to the role. But it doesn't matter who it is. Hire somebody like you did in Dota, where you literally hired a man who was known for, caring about Dota and having flamboyant suits. That used to be the criteria. Now, let's get a real fucking public-facing commissioner or community manager to run this circuit, get your ranking sorted, and let's go to an era of fucking Counter-Strike that we've never been in before, please.
By the way, obviously, I just mean this as an example, but I unironically would recommend someone like Graham, who's been in all different things, being team
also
orgs,
a great
shout,
yeah.
worked as an admin. That's the sort of person. By the way, there's other people.
Jason Lake might have something to say about it. He needs him. He needs his Graham.
The people who do the fucking that Polish guy who does all the admin shit and got all the cheats. These guys know the scene. And by the way, I'm saying that even though they could have a bias towards ESL, I'll take that over nobody. So I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Richard's on the right path there with the community manager. I thought that was his video application at one point, but
they'd never hire me, and I wouldn't want them to. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't trust myself. I wouldn't trust myself with the terrible power. I'm not the guy to wield it. I can be a vengeful God Grim. I know you've only known me 20 years or whatever.
If you get the ring, it would be too much.
Why shouldn't it be used for me? It's not that I'm a bad person. It's just, why shouldn't it be used to protect my people, Duncan?
I would actually go further than that. I think Valve need to take even more ownership over the ecosystem. I think one thing that people currently haven't really factored in is that actually we're completely beholden to HLTV because they're the source of all the data, and what event they choose to cover is what event gets put in the ranking. Now, this may be fixed in 2025, but I still think that Valve needs to take ownership. I think they need to implement a system like they have in Dota, where tournament organizers have to run all their official matches through what they call a ticket system. And then Valve would then have the pro database of matches. So they would have a full list of all the matches, who played in all the matches, all the Steam, everything would be their data, and they would hold all of it. It wouldn't be HLTV's data. And that's not to knock HLTV, because they do a great job, whatever they do, but they're a third party who do have an influence currently on the rankings. And for example, right now you could go and use Liquipedia's version of data. Shout out to Liquipedia, all the editors, free, community people who do that all for free. It's great. It's a fantastic resource. Obviously, you can't use Liquipedia because they're owned by Team Liquid, so that's out straight away. But I think Valve need to take even more ownership over this whole system. If they're going to assign tournament licenses, then they have to give out a tournament ticket. And then that ticket holds all the matches for that specific tournament. Everything's tracked in Valve's internal database. Someone has to manage that. They need a community manager. I think it all ties into the fact that Valve, with all these rules they have, they need to be more involved. They can't just be a blog post every now and then, and maybe you'll get a response to your email, maybe you won't get a response to your email. And it feels like they're taking on an awful lot, and they don't have a plan of how to execute it properly. And the only thing I'll say on top of that is just everyone who has a problem with what they're doing, or can see a problem with what they're doing, just please contact them. Tweet about it if you have to, like I've been doing. Email them if you can, whatever you can do, because when we get to 2025, it's almost going to be too late to fix some of these issues in the early point. So
we'll have to go through at least the first half of the circuit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think just make sure you're trying to point out the issues. I know the individual tournament organizers are having their own issues with some of the things that Valve are doing, because some of their tournament formats don't quite fit, or they can't figure out how to make them fit because the rules are so stringent, and they can't some people can't understand the rules. I don't understand some of the rules, because some of the tournaments I'm seeing being proposed don't fit with Valve's rules, but then I'm being told that they do. And I run it through 3 different times. I'm like, this doesn't fit what Valve say you can do. And then it's but maybe they've got a dispensation for the first half of next year because it's too early to have all these invites and all these tier 1 events happen and everything else. But yeah, there's a lot of unknowns right now, and it would just be nice to have Valve, 1, communicate it, 2, have someone who is actively communicating and interacting with the ecosystem, because it doesn't feel like they do. And yeah, I mean, I've known Valve as long as some of you guys have. We've spoken at the majors when I used to run them from ESL. I've been with them at majors recently. I know them; they're all nice people, but it does feel like they're taking on something that, not that they're not qualified to do, but that they're certainly not don't have the capacity to do. And yeah, I mean, I would recommend Mihao from ESL for sure as that role. You recommend me, I recommend him, he'll recommend someone else, and we'll all have a great time. But someone needs to be able to take up that role. And I think it probably is someone more administrative than Chad. I love Chad as much as everyone else, but I think that he might get a bit overwhelmed by all like the fucking number crunching and shit like that. But he'd be a great spokesperson for sure.
They don't have to.
yeah.
They actually can hire more than one person. I was going to point.
They could hire more than one person. That's true. They could have the mouthpiece.
We're asking for the world now. We're asking for the world now. You know, two people.
See, Richard, I'm just used to the Riot Games deep state, where they just hire a zillion people and then they hide them within an obscure hierarchy, and then the people who actually make the decisions just hide behind like triple layers of underlings that do the speaking for them. So,
bro, if that was going on, I don't even know who would be in their equivalent of the D20, the shadowy, pathetic D20. Don't even know what it would be, but yeah. I mean, put it this way: there are many fine choices. You can go to people who maybe aren't the best public facing and don't have that polish. But do understand the technical aspects and the mathematical aspects that go into running a circuit. Maybe that's what Valve want. But at some point, Valve's biggest problem remains communication. And as I said, I think we're all past the point of it being funny or kitsch or cute or different. You're running an esport now. You're running a sports circuit now. It isn't viable to not have a spokesperson. It's just absurd.
I would also say that, part of the problem with like why they had to basically do the Noah's flood on their esport, you know what I mean, and save the animals 2x2 and reset the earth, was because basically there was nobody watching this as it encroached kind of year after year. This wasn't something like the partnership model wasn't something that happened overnight. It took years to develop into the stultifying system that emerged. And so if you had somebody who is actually like dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, the insidious creep is much less likely to occur. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. But I mean, it still remains that, look, I know the average pleb will say this because they're angry about like their game and your game is bad and why won't you tell me when you're going to take away sub-tick and give us 128 tick, and the average fan remains a moron. But I get why Valve wouldn't want to be embroiled in timescales of developing the game, and that's fine. I would argue that's still a bit anachronistic when Rainbow Six at their world championship bring on the developers to talk about anti-cheat changes and other things like this. I would argue Valve, once a pioneering company, have fallen behind other games developers in a lot of ways in terms of how they communicate things and what they understand their audience's priorities to be. But this is a sports circuit now, sir. You can't do it. Imagine any sport on earth where there was no communication except the occasional blog post. Just imagine it. Just imagine it. Imagine what it would look like. Premier League teams going, is the league starting next week? You know what I mean? It's Super Bowl on in 8 weeks, or because we've got. My quarterback needs a visa.
By the way, who's in the playoffs? We don't know.
yeah, exactly. Like it is absurd on its face, and so yes, they are going to have to wake up. I don't know if they will. I don't know if they'll take any of this to heart. Certainly, I wouldn't be the person to tip them one way or the other. But what I will say is, we've got a great chance at a fresh start of competitive Counter-Strike. New system, new format, new TOs, new circuit, new involvement from Valve. If we just get the public-facing communication to go along with all of this, we can really mold it into something good. It's like the only little bit of the ingredient that's missing apart from a robust world ranking. So I certainly hope that's what we're going to get, but I won't hold my breath.
I will say this was an unusually optimistic Four Horsemen, especially with our conclusion. But that doesn't matter because at the end of
No.
the day, esports still had to ask. See you next time.